In her past life, the main character was a poor orphan who was abandoned twice and lived for 23 years in complete solitude. One day, a terrible tragedy happened to her. The girl, unsuspecting, was returning from work late in the evening and was hit by a truck. After which she was reborn in a completely different world under the name Louise, and the mother gave this beautiful name to her beloved daughter. Louise's life was full of love and abundance. Every day of the girl was like a fairy tale. Then the little girl didn't worry about anything. She was next to her beloved mother, who gave her maternal warmth and tenderness day after day. Everything would have been too good if her mother had not died one day when the little girl was only 13 years old. Soon after, the father brought a new woman into the house where love and respect had previously reigned to replace his former lover. This lady asked the gentleman not to pay attention to the little girl, who, in her opinion, was already an adult and should take care of herself. The father and his new wife went away somewhere again, often leaving the little girl alone, and so, once again, she found herself abandoned and unwanted. Due to long loneliness, the little girl one day had a cherished dream that she would like to fulfill in her life. The abandoned girl soon grew up, dreaming of meeting a good man and creating her own loving family. The evil stepmother had been actively pushing the girl towards marriage all this time, assuring her that she needed to get married as soon as possible. But the lady met some very strange candidates along the way. After turning down marriage proposals every time, the day finally came. A letter arrived at her house, and the lady decided that another loser had decided to propose marriage to her, just like everyone else had proposed before. The young lady was excited by the new message and asked her stepmother what it all meant. The lady confessed that since the lady continues to refuse all candidates, she decided to personally find a worthy groom for her. Having prepared a portrait of the venerable gentleman, the lady loudly declared that her future husband would be His Grace Alex Brent, Grand Duke of the Rilt Empire. From now on, she had no right to refuse, and her stepmother assured her that this was the best candidate and the wedding would definitely take place. At first, the heroine refused, as before, but in the end, even her father intervened, declaring that the girl was already quite grown up, and it was high time to leave the house. He scolded his daughter. She rejected marriage proposals over trifles. He was tired of her childishness, and he angrily shouted, "The wedding with the Duke will take place, and that's it." Thus, the heroine was forced to marry an unknown man, but only later did she find out that the family had a huge debt, and this was the only reason for the wedding. She agreed to the marriage in order to finally leave the house in which there had been no love or mutual respect for a long time. One fine day, the girl saw her husband for the first time on the first day of the wedding, while the meeting asked the newlyweds to love each other in sorrow and in joy. The heroine was ready to accept this role in order to finally become truly happy in this life. She was incredibly afraid of this day, but as soon as she saw her husband for the first time, it seemed to her that a light emanated from him, illuminating everything around and bringing goodness. Then the lady believed that she could start her life from scratch, and besides, her husband's appearance began to attract her little by little. The first wedding night of the husband and wife was a real disappointment, and to the heroine's surprise, nothing happened between them. The young man felt pathetic and mentally apologized for daring to become the husband of a beautiful girl. She assured him that everything was perfectly fine and that Alex shouldn't feel guilty, but in reality, she realized that everything was lost. And the happy life that Louise had dreamed of all these years will turn into a real horror for her. Her new husband, Alexa, can't look her in the eyes even after their first night together. No one said that Alex could have such problems, and the lady could not have imagined that the first wedding night would be so terrible. On her first night, the heroine was filled with only thoughts, and despite all this, she tried to remain positive, and was even afraid that the problem was really in her. This is probably why the Duke looked for a bride in another empire, because he could not find anyone in his hometown. Alex didn't seem like a bad person. Maybe he was just shy, and the heroine was sure that if they worked on their relationship, everything would definitely work out. It was a new beginning, a beginning to create a happy family, and Louise tried her best to believe in it. The first day of family life was quite ordinary. The lady went down to the library to find an interesting book for herself. The Duke's library contained many abstruse books that immediately attracted her attention. The library was incredibly huge, and the lady decided to look at other shelves. She was very curious if there was something mysterious on the other side. The only mysterious thing here was the gentleman, into whose strong shoulder she had imperceptibly crashed with all her strength. It was Mr. Alex who, as soon as he saw his wife, was incredibly frightened, as if he had seen a ghost. He was very worried and convinced that Louise was okay, but he was curious about what she was doing there. The lady said she simply decided to occupy herself with something and learn more about the place where she was going to live, and the gentleman even decided to recommend some books to her. From that day on, their relationship changed. The Duke recommended books, they enjoyed tea together every morning, and talked to each other a lot. The lady learned that Duke Alex was a gentle and very kind man, and most likely because he stuttered, he seemed withdrawn and shy. At such moments, on the one hand, she felt sorry for him, but the lady knew that Alex had to become more self-confident. She decided to ask the maid what had happened. This story was known throughout the empire, and it all started with the relationship between His Majesty the Emperor and the Duke. The conversation was about the late Grand Duke, who was probably the young gentleman's father. The maid wondered if Louise had heard of His Majesty Axon Kaiserly, the cruel and tyrannical ruler of the Rilth Empire. His Serene Highness the Grand Duke devoted his entire life to fighting against the Emperor so that he would not be able to carry out his selfish plans. His Majesty the Emperor strongly disliked the ideal Grand Duke, who radiated charisma and dignity. Thus, rumors spread throughout the imperial palace that it was better not to have any dealings with the Grand Duke brand, and the Emperor was focused on finding fault with the Grand Duke's family. The Duke's family was repeatedly criticized and even endangered because of the Emperor's disregard for them. The Grand Duke became more strict with Duke Alex, insisting that he must support the ducal house and must not bring shame on his family. The boy had a small affliction from early childhood. He stuttered and found it difficult to fully pronounce a speech. The Duke called it treatment, but being a simple servant, she could not judge his methods. His Majesty the Emperor noticed the relationship between father and son and mercilessly tormented Duke Alex, and then his whole tyrant nature was exposed. As for the stories about His Majesty the Emperor's wrath, Louise knew them firsthand. Louise's first encounter with the tyrant took place at a banquet held in the imperial palace after the wedding ceremony, and even at a banquet that should have been filled with blessings, the tyrant did not hesitate to mock. He called the Duke a fool who had nothing but a pretty face, and publicly insulted his wife, calling her a thick-headed empty head. The Emperor laughed in the eyes of the Duke and his wife, and menacingly asked the other aristocrats if they all disagreed with him. A wave of ridicule and insults directed at him, and Alex swept through the hall, and this was quite logical in aristocratic circles. Louise was incredibly unhappy about this, but in the presence of the Emperor it was impossible to openly show anger. She tried to brush off the thought that karma would one day punish this villain, but Alex, unable to bear it, rebelled against the Emperor. After which the ruler almost broke into the Duke's residence with his army in order to overthrow him from his land forever. The maid heard that the current banquet was held by the Emperor as an apology, and then the heroes endured incredible hardships. Still, Louise would like everything to go smoothly this time, and without incidents that could leave traces in her and Alex's souls. Today she only dreamed that the banquet would pass quietly and calmly, and that the Emperor would not pay any attention. Louise was worried, thinking what the Emperor might do this time, because he could afford absolutely anything. Even though she was deeply worried, she was also worried about her husband, whose hands trembled at the sight of the Emperor. Turning her attention to him, she realized that Alex was very worried right now, and his reaction almost caused a big disaster. The Emperor had already noticed the Duke's appearance, and Louise could only pray that the banquet would simply pass off peacefully and safely. Because the heroine wanted it too much, everything happened exactly the opposite, and the Emperor had already started telling a funny story about how people are cured of stuttering when they receive an electric shock. The gentleman stated that, as an apology, he was ready to ensure that the Duke's illness was cured. The Emperor angrily declared that the Duke had disgraced the empire and tarnished the authority of the ducal house, and so, from that day on, he had stripped him of his title. All the possessions of the duchy must be confiscated, and anyone who disregards his orders and helps the Duke will be immediately executed. Just like that, in just 1 second the Duke lost all his possessions, and the Emperor, with a grin, promised to pray for his recovery. After the banquet, Louise sat on the ground in front of the gates to the Duchy of Brent, which had fallen to their family overnight. Who would have thought that the Emperor would be so crazy, so reckless, that he would allow the Duke to fall in such a way? Even Alex couldn't have expected it, and only regretted that Louise now found herself in such a hopeless situation solely because of him. They were literally left on the street. despite all the wealth that the ducal house possessed. Alex couldn't believe that in one moment he was deprived of his home, and all thanks to one villain. Despite her strong feelings, Louise saw in him a noble and handsome young man, and could not bear that the Duke now blamed himself for everything. Louise was determined that since this had happened, they had to do everything they could to survive, and first of all, they had to find a place to spend the night. There was no time to stand there in a daze, and they went to the first inn that agreed to accept them only because the heroes found themselves in a difficult situation. The Grand Ducal family, who had never slept in a hotel before, now found themselves in a room for ordinary people. Louise thanked him thoughtfully for his help, but when she saw the Duke behind her, she realized it was the same man. The lady warned them that they needed to move out before His Majesty the Emperor found out about everything, and every hotel employee valued only their own life. The new living conditions after the ducal mansion were completely different, and the lady could not believe that they would have to sleep here. The heroes had to disgrace themselves in front of their uncle's house, asking for help, but even there they were immediately kicked out. Pointing to the bed, the girl couldn't believe that she would have to sleep in this old and disgusting place. The lady was the Duke's sister, named Eloy, and she seemed completely unaware of her brother's predicament. She just screamed that he had to fix everything, and she wanted to return to the beautiful chambers as soon as possible. Louise saw in this spoiled, ill-mannered girl a lady who probably did not understand the seriousness of the situation. She carefully laid the bed linen on the bed, realizing how tired the Duke was after the whole day, and that he definitely needed rest. Trying in every way to cheer him up, his caring wife assured him that everything would definitely be fine for them in the future. Now they all need to get a good night's sleep, so that tomorrow they can understand how to act in a new life where they have nothing left behind. Louise was Alex's only support and mainstay, and only in this girl did he see light in his dark life. With tears in his eyes, the Duke promised that Louise would receive much more love in the next life, and he would make sure that she no longer needed anything. Alex wanted to become the best and most devoted husband for her, behind whom she would feel like she was behind a stone wall. In the next life, he promised that he would be able to protect his beloved, no matter what difficulties they had to go through, even if human lives were at stake. It turned out that the problem had been somewhat solved that night, but the next morning Louise never expected to find Alex dead, with an empty jar of rat poison lying next to him. Now Louise was suddenly left completely alone, with a total lack of understanding as to why her husband had done this. The questions tormented her, devoured her from the inside. She grabbed onto every detail, trying to find at least some clue, a key to solving this madness. How to come to terms with this loss, how to forgive herself for not being able to prevent this tragedy, and the question of why will forever remain with her. Alex woke up. Not just woke up, as if after a deep sleep, but woke up as if he had been torn from oblivion straight into a nightmarish reality. The world around him pulsed with a crimson light, the air burned his nostrils with a sulphurous stench, and the ground beneath him trembled with a dull, guttural rumble. Before him loomed a monstrous figure, woven from darkness and bone, a monster from the underworld, towering, with skin like scorched earth, horns twisting in a terrifying spiral, and many arms reaching out to him. Alex was a completely different person. He felt a chill down his spine and his heart pounding wildly in his chest. Alex was no longer the fool he had been in his past life. He remembered every detail of his previous existence, every mistake, every loss. The first blow, the second, the third, the blade slid between the monster's many arms, breaking through to its core. The demon roared in rage and pain, his attacks becoming more and more furious and desperate. He knew that he had no right to make a mistake. Not only his survival, but also the fate of many others depended on his victory. The hellish landscape seemed eternal, but Alex knew that even in this hopelessness there was a way. The monster was defeated, and Alex continued on his way until the last demon was defeated, and the light illuminated this cursed place until peace came. Finally, the last drop of the hellish monster's blood was spilled, and the bloody battle ended for Alex. Instead of a sense of accomplishment, the young man was met with only a silent void, and everything in his new life began so suddenly. One day, an ominous gate opened in the world, bloodthirsty monsters poured out, and a terrible threat loomed over the peaceful world. People appeared who began to resist the monsters, people chosen by the system. They were called awakened, and they possessed superhuman abilities. The awakened became stronger by leveling up through constant quests, and they fought monsters using their strength. And finally, Alex managed to end this confrontation. The sinister monsters calmed down, and this bloody battle was really long. Alex needed a good rest after the terrible battle, and he was so tired after all this time. Thanks to Alex's efforts, peace would return to the world, but he felt a strange sense that the end had not yet come. Suddenly, a pop-up game window appeared in front of the hero, which he never expected to see. The young man had successfully completed the battle and had already received his final reward, meaning that even the final battle was yet another test. Of course, Alex wanted to receive the award, and he had no reason to refuse. He pressed the agree button, and maybe as a reward they would send him to a resort or somewhere else, and Alex was not at all against relaxing. Alex was sure that the final battle was over, and that he would no longer have to fight the terrible demons. The game had its own rules, and the player had to follow them strictly. Suddenly, Alex's consciousness began to slowly fade, and perhaps this was the work of the insidious system. Alex had no idea what the future held or how the game would end. Perhaps this was the long-awaited reward, and Alex hoped that he would be able to simply do nothing and relax for a while. Instead of the sweet sound of the surf, the young man's consciousness sank into the depths, and for some reason the gentleman heard a noise, as if someone was speaking to him, and at that moment he wanted to return as quickly as possible. Opening his eyes, Alex did not understand where he was. He had just been fighting a bloodthirsty monster. He had been out for too long, and he had no memory of how it all ended. And instead of a silent city and bloodthirsty monsters, he saw a caring lady who was simply incredibly happy that Alex was alive. The girl asked if everything was okay with him, and just a few hours ago his body was lifeless. He had no idea who the girl was, or whether she had been watching him all this time. Alex expressed his respect with great gratitude, realizing that it was she who had been taking care of him all this time. Unexpectedly, this girl called him darling, and this meant that they clearly had a fairly close relationship. Alex never expected to wake up and see in front of him a lady who clearly had strong feelings for him. And is his final reward not a vacation at a resort with a pool and cocktails? All this time the gentleman was a cold-blooded loner, and now he has a real wife. His mother and sister ran into the room, shouting how he was feeling, and whether he really didn't have any pain. The young man could not understand what all the fuss was about, and why all these people were shouting so furiously. There was also a doctor there who assured the girls that the young man needed rest now, and everyone should leave him alone. And as it turned out, Alex did not end up in a warm pool, and because of the last reward, he was placed in the body of a completely different person. Lost in thought, it turns out that the young man moved into Alex's wife, and this was the very body he ended up in. He remembered very well that when he woke up, the first thing he saw was a girl crying, as if she had seen a ghost in front of her. She whispered something about how she hated Alex for what he did, but she could never have imagined that he could do this to his family. The lady spoke. She knew very well that the loss of property and status was a strong blow to all of us, but this did not mean that one could leave one's beloved family. Tears burned her face like boiling water, and a lump formed in her throat, making it difficult to breathe. She went through the last few days in her memory, searching for at least some hint, some explanation for this terrible tragedy. The young man understood that this girl had lost her loved one, Alex. In just one night, it seemed that this man had decided on a desperate act. Meanwhile, Alex tried to call the system to at least somehow figure out what was happening, but nothing happened. The most amazing thing is that he and the previous hero, Alex, were like two peas in a pod. Until now, the system gave the young man rewards that could be used or that had some connection to him, but now everything that happens now is somehow connected to him. It was too unusual for the hero to suddenly get a wife, and he had always been a cold-blooded loner. Louise still addressed her beloved husband as darling, and she still could not believe that he had come back from the dead. Her husband's face was incredibly pale, and she was still worried whether he was really okay. Louise decided to talk about what she had said before, admitting that she did not feel hatred, but at that moment she was incredibly upset by his actions. All this time she was too picky towards a man who had not fully recovered from what had happened. Now her eyes were open again, and for the hero it was a real curse, because this sweet girl was still sure that he was Alex. Louise asked him to promise that such poisoning would not happen again, otherwise she would scold him. She was his legal wife and sweetly tried to kiss him, but her new husband suddenly spat all the water in her face. Louise probably expected the new Alex to behave so strangely after visiting that end of the world. The young man felt incredibly uncomfortable and out of place, and he only asked the girl for her sincere forgiveness, wondering if everything would be okay now. Louise came out of the room, her face wet with water, but this was just a trifle compared to what she had recently had to endure. She probably shouldn't have been so pushy towards a man who was just recovering, and the heroine was sure he was accidentally serious. And Louise still couldn't believe that Alex was alive, and the heroine herself was still in deep shock. The man still remains her faithful and devoted husband who just recently faced a family tragedy. Louise was not to be fooled, and she noticed that something had clearly changed in this man. He usually wears a lot of things, as if he were shackling himself from the outside world, not wanting to show his inner self. Today, Alex looked completely different. His shirt completely exposed his chest, and before the gentleman had never worn anything like this, so loose. The shirt was bothering her, but the heroine proudly declared that he hadn't eaten anything since yesterday, and she had to take care of it. Having finally finished the plate of delicious stew, Louise wondered if they would really be kicked out of this place again, but unfortunately, they had nowhere else to go. Alex immediately noticed his wife's anxiety and understood that she was worried for a reason. The heroine said that they could no longer stay here. The owners urged them on every time they encountered each other. It was unknown what the tyrant emperor might do next. Being sure that Alex was unlikely to help here, the heroine understood that she had to decide everything herself. Never had Louise seen Alex so calm and focused, as if her husband was really trying to figure out this problem. After a few minutes, the young man stood up and declared that he would have to solve this problem somehow. All this time he was really thinking about how to help the family, and it seemed he had found a solution to the problem. The wife did not expect at all how her husband was ready and capable of such a thing, because before she solved all the problems on her own. This certainly didn't sound like the most passive and withdrawn Alex she knew before the poisoning. Suddenly, the husband declared that his wife should not worry, and that his main concern for the family was his work, and for the first time he spoke with such confidence. Could it really be that the changes had happened after meeting the emperor, and the heroine couldn't believe it? It was quite possible that the poison had had this effect on him. Without even guessing what Alex was going to do, Louise modestly asked what path awaited them next. The young man stated that first they needed to earn enough money to buy a whole house, and that was his only solution. The man who previously couldn't even look at his wife suddenly changed so much. And Louise still couldn't understand how he was going to save up for a whole house, and whether it was really her real husband sitting in front of her. Alex asked to wait here, and he himself hurried somewhere, and finally decided to ask his wife about the most important question. And his question was so unexpected that even Louise herself was ready to faint, and he asked what the name of the emperor himself was. Alex may have just decided to ask the emperor's name, as if they had never met before, but he was clearly planning to do something. Louise was ready to fall asleep right on the table from fatigue, and asked her husband to come back quickly, because she would be worried all this time. As soon as the gentleman stepped outside, he realized that he had entered the world of a novel from the last century, but at least he had not been transported back to primitive times. Before setting off, Alex asked his wife the name of the emperor, Axon Kaiserli, and for some reason his name seemed very familiar to the young man. Still, the hero's memory slowly returned, and he managed to remember something from his past life. In his past life, he received a distorted son as a reward. The main character of that book was named Axon. Despite being born into an imperial family, the boy remained invisible all his life. Because of this, he had a very difficult childhood, in the shadows and in seclusion, and he was not at all a successful aristocrat. Axon, who deeply hated his position, dreamed of power that no one could ignore. In the end, he ascended to the throne, literally tearing his way to it. Through murder and blood, he literally walked over the heads of his comrades. It seems that the content of the book was like this, and the hero did the right thing by throwing the novel away and never reading it, but he hardly thought that he would ever need it. He remembered thinking he would get another reward, so he decided to read the book and brighten up the anticipation. And if he was now in the world of that work, then he should appear as a character named Alex. And if everything really was as the hero assumes, this definitely couldn't have happened. Alex knew very well about the Duke who died after drinking rat poison, and it turns out that he is that very man. Is the last reward for all that hard work the life of a Duke who is being persecuted by a tyrant? It was really hard to believe, but suddenly a bright, juicy, ripe tomato flew into the Duke's face. Confused about who could have done this, rage flared up in the chest of the young man, who in his past life had never allowed himself to be treated like this. The hero had a certain skill, a look that evoked an overwhelming feeling of fear. The boy who had so brazenly thrown the tomato at him only continued to laugh and ask what the pathetic Duke could do to him. And no matter how hard Alex tried to call up the system window to punish the boy, he was completely unsuccessful. The mother ran up and screamed angrily. Her son was continuing to misbehave, and she was clearly making it clear to him that this was not the place to fool around. The bully insisted that this man could no longer be called a duke, and all because he had recently lost his title. Alex couldn't believe it had actually happened, and could it be that the Lord, the Grand Duke, had been treated like this all this time? The stinking tomato that landed in his face was proof enough of the other locals' feelings towards this man. Now it was a different hero. His name was Alex, and he would not allow anyone to bully him anymore. A few days after Alex left the shelter, he never returned, and Louise began to worry more and more. Alex told the shelter owner that he would pay 3 times as much when he returned, and she really hoped that they would not end up on the street. The wife was worried that she should follow her husband, and even the sister was shocked that her brother still hadn't returned. She didn't understand how he was going to find the house, and maybe he was starting to have problems with his head because of the rat poison. Louise believed in her husband and asked the lady not to speak such cruelly towards her brother under any circumstances. Eloy believed she was right, and how her brother, who couldn't even hunt, let alone ride a horse, would be able to earn money to buy a house. She chuckled and simply asked if he had hit his head on a rock somewhere and was now lying breathless somewhere in the bushes. There was some logic in her words, but Louise tried to believe that Alex probably had reasons for leaving, and they should just trust him and wait a little. The mother was also completely puzzled. Her son had never done anything on his own before, but now he volunteered to find a place to live. And even if Alex still has his head in the right place because of the Emperor's order, no one else will dare to give the Duke a job. Every day she faithfully awaited her husband's return, and yet that happy day came when she finally saw a familiar silhouette through the window. There was no mistaking the silhouette for any other, the radiant face and the tall stature, and it was definitely Alex. Understanding that his wife had been waiting for him faithfully all this time, she greeted him with the question of where he had been all this time. The young man immediately suggested leaving the conversation for later, and now suggested immediately packing their things. The gentleman found a house in which they can now live, but he certainly did not expect such a reaction from his family. He asked the girls not to worry. He was not taking away someone else's home, but in any case, they needed to hurry right now. What was even more surprising was that Alex no longer stuttered. His sister noticed this immediately, and his mother saw how much confidence he had gained. They had never seen Alex like this before, as if he had become a completely different person, but the young man simply blamed everything on poisoning. He had to tell a stupid story about an illness that was cured by rat poison, and now he was completely healthy. Alex had to come up with a ridiculous story about illness, but his mother and her daughter really thought so. The setting sun above the carriage painted the sky in incredible shades of orange, crimson, and gold. Alex's story was incredible nonsense. He was cured by poison, but fortunately everyone believed it, and the young man, not knowing the real Alex, seemed to be walking through a minefield. Louise was interested to know how her husband managed to find a place to live, and whether he had borrowed a huge sum of money. The Duke didn't sell anything, he just sold part of what he owned, and his wife couldn't understand when he managed to do all this. She was absolutely sure that Alex would not think of such a thing, and finally the heroes almost arrived at the place. The gates were incredibly huge and luxurious, and the heroine could not believe that this palace was really their new home. And did the husband really buy such a mansion? The young man said that this property was put up for sale in a very short time, so he immediately bought this house. With tears in her eyes, Louise looked at the incredibly luxurious house, and in such a place they definitely wouldn't have to worry about stupid rumors, and would her dream of a happy family finally be forgotten. In fact, Alex was just lucky. There are rumors that the house is haunted, so everyone who lived here simply ran away. Last night, the new owner of the house also fled because of the ghost. That was the peculiarity of these mansions. The incredibly luxurious palace turned out to be a haven for evil ghosts who tried in every possible way to drive out the owners. Alex said in a cheerful voice that a ghost had appeared to the owner last night, and he hadn't even picked up his things. After this, the gentleman immediately put the house up for sale at a very low price, and Alex took advantage of the great opportunity. If it weren't for this house, they would have had to spend the night on the street, and it's unclear how the hero's fate would have turned out. Hearing about the ghost, the ladies were scared, but now they will have to live with a real, unknown entity. Alex didn't see anything wrong with this and suggested that they go inside as soon as possible, as it would be much better than hanging around outside. The sister did not take this news with joy and shouted that the family should live with ghosts themselves and that she herself was not going to go there under any circumstances. Clutching her head, Louise only saw her sister as a spoiled girl who hardly understood the seriousness of the situation. It was clear to everyone that the girl was still very young, but her behavior seemed like overkill. Eloy was upset that her engagement to her beloved also fell through, but the Emperor was to blame for everything. Alex always took all the blame on himself, and Louise was sure that now he felt absolutely terrible. She asked her husband to ignore the young lady's behavior, but Alex could not force her and suggested leaving without her. The mother did not expect such behavior from her son and was outraged that he dared to say such things. Yes, his sister can be called a spoiled girl, but she was simply upset and could not cope with her emotions. The young man was sure that she would definitely return to the house as soon as she realized that she hardly wanted to spend the night on the street. Taking the suitcase in his hands, Alex headed towards the house to finally look around everything inside and start a new life. His mother was puzzled by how a man could change so much, and she even thought that if she had known that such changes would occur, she would have fed him the poison much earlier. She didn't say it out loud and suggested that Louise follow her example and go to their new home. After all, her daughter won't go anywhere anyway, and as soon as she calms down, she will immediately understand everything and come back. And even if the young lady's pride is broken, she will still have nowhere to go. Louise had no intention of personally dealing with the girl with 8th grade syndrome and simply decided to stay away from her. The house looked incredibly luxurious, a huge, well-kept garden, fragrant roses, and 2 floors of boundless happiness. From a closer distance, the mansion appeared even larger. It seemed to have been built a long time ago. The first thing the heroes saw on the door was a huge spider web, which meant that the previous tenant had indeed escaped from the pawn. If you look closely, there was a terrible mess here, although the owner of the mansion lived here only yesterday. Before going in, I turned to my husband to make sure once again that they had made the right decision. And it was awkward to talk about it, but she decided to ask if the ghost stories were just rumors. Asking Alex to find her a new place to live would be ignorant on her part, but the girl was only very worried. Alex understood the fear. He was sure his wife would like it here, and suggested they look around first and then draw conclusions. Mother proudly went to her new home, declaring that she would soon die, and it would be better to make friends in advance, even if they were ghosts. Her words may have sounded strange, but the Duchess was not afraid of anyone at all, and was ready to live in this luxurious mansion. And the fact that it really was luxurious inside was the absolute truth, and even Louise did not expect to see such a thing. When she went inside, she was amazed at how this was even possible, and the owner sold the house at such a low price. The heroine felt like she would never be able to live in such a cozy big house again. It was incredibly clean and beautiful, and Louise couldn't believe that happiness had really come into their lives. Of course, this was not the Duke's residence, but the heroine was sure that they would be able to get along with the local ghosts. Louise seemed to be incredibly pleased with the place and felt good for the first time in a long time. Alex immediately noticed that his wife was delighted, and he was simply happy to see her in such a state. For a long time, Louise was worried, but now she only thanked her husband for the opportunity to live here. The heroine had no idea that we would be able to find such a wonderful place. She asked for forgiveness for having doubted her lover for a long time. Now it was as if there were no omissions or barriers between them, and Alex proved who he really is. Suddenly, the front door creaked, and after hearing about ghosts, the heroes immediately turned around. It was the younger sister who had been wandering around the mansion for a while and decided to go inside. She arrived much faster than Louise had expected, and finally, the whole family was together. Eloy was amazed as soon as she stepped inside, as she also didn't expect the mansion to be so beautiful. The lady cried out joyfully. It was spacious and elegant here, and she wanted to go up to the 2nd floor as soon as possible. There were many rooms in the mansion, so each girl could choose any one she liked. Louise decided to cook something to eat, realizing how tired the whole family was from wandering. The ladies went to choose a room, and Alex decided to go wash up and get ready for the first family dinner in a new place. For the hero, all these ladies were strangers whom he had not seen before, but he could not ignore the people who found themselves on the street. He understood that they had now become his loyal and devoted family, whom he needed to take care of. He might be able to hide the fact that he's not the real Alex for a long time, but the girls are already suspicious, so sooner or later they'll expose him. Now everything was absolutely unimportant, and the young man just wanted to get into the hot bath as quickly as possible. For a long time, he did not even have the opportunity to live his former life as a duke, after the emperor brazenly kicked him out of the house. And now, after a long time, Alex finally felt great, as if his life was again similar to the past. The hero looked in the mirror, and what was strangest was that he was reborn with his own appearance. He and Alex really did look alike, except for the scars. They were like two peas in a pod with the previous hero. Judging by his family's reaction, the gentleman suffered from a stutter, and the young man wondered what this duke did in the first place. He could only guess what kind of person Alex really was and how he treated his family. After studying various options, Alex came to the conclusion that this world is indeed a world inside a novel called The Distorted Sun. This allowed him to study the information he had obtained from the book at a high price, but even if this meant distorting the original plot, could the book really be considered a reward? Although the hero system window was now fully accessible, he still continued to think about missions. In his past life, Alex heroically fought demons from hell, and he became very accustomed to his life. Having plunged into a hot bath, the hero felt a very familiar feeling, as if warmth was spreading inside, and the dearest people were nearby. In the kitchen, Louise was busy cooking and needed to find at least some ingredients. The previous owner of the house ran away and left all the food behind, and for the heroes this was a real salvation. And if the mansion now belonged to them, Louise was sure that the food also rightfully belonged to their family. The first thing the heroine managed to find was a large supply of potatoes, which could serve as an ideal dish for a family dinner. Looking around, the girl noticed that there were so many useful things in the kitchen that could be used in cooking. Now she could only cook some fragrant potatoes and somehow please her family. The aroma of hot potatoes spread throughout the kitchen, and a delicious dinner was almost ready. Smelling a fragrant, pleasant aroma, Eloy immediately found herself in the kitchen to check what was smelling so delicious. Louise asked to call Alex and Mother to the dining room because dinner was almost ready. As soon as Eloy saw that they were expecting just boiled potatoes for dinner, she couldn't believe her eyes. The girl, with tears in her eyes, admitted that since yesterday she had been eating only bread without anything else and thought that for dinner she could have soup or at least a steak. The young lady continued to be capricious like a little child, but Louise decided to ignore her. In the duchy, she could enjoy not only soups and steaks, but also a variety of exquisite desserts, ordering any dish from the chef. Hasn't this girl realized yet that they haven't been in the duchy for a long time, and now they have to be content with what they have? Louise said that if the potatoes were too dry, she could make potato soup, and that was all they could eat for now. Running out of the kitchen, the young lady shouted loudly that she was not going to have dinner, but the heroine did not even intend to run after her. If she really wants to eat, she'll come crawling back, and it's high time this girl grew up. The fragrant potatoes were served at the table, and Louise, with a smile on her face, was happy that they were simply in the family circle. Anyway, it was the first dinner in the new house, so at such a moment one definitely couldn't be sad and quarrel. There were fragrant potatoes for dinner today, and if it weren't for the supplies from the previous owner, the heroes would have gone hungry. Mother declared that if ghosts really lived in this mansion, she would like them to sneak into His Majesty's bedroom tonight, and they scared him to the point of shaking in his knees, so that he would never again dare to attack good people. It seems that after the housing problem was solved, Mother remembered the object of her anger, and Louise was simply happy to have a quiet dinner together. Mother assured them that they were lucky that they could eat, but they also needed to think about how to live on, because she couldn't survive for long on potatoes alone. Suddenly, Alex announced that he would slaughter a lamb tomorrow, and the house was bought along with all the property. The information sounded terrifying to the lady, and she wondered if her son could really kill the animal with his own hands. The mother didn't understand when her boy became so bold and confident, and he definitely made it clear that it wasn't difficult at all. Since childhood, Alex always cried. He felt sorry for any animal, and he was definitely not capable of killing an animal. It turns out that Alex was simply soft-hearted and his body was perfectly fine, but the hero was incredibly worried about this. Louise still couldn't believe how people could change so much, and her mother even suggested feeding poison to the emperor, and perhaps he would change too. Her anger knew no bounds. She was ready to feed poison to all the nobles, simply because they could watch other people suffer. Everyone cares only about themselves. Mother was absolutely sure of this, and all the people don't care what the empire will become with such a ruler. But until recently, they were also nobles. They, like everyone else, could do nothing because of their great fear of the emperor. They had no choice but to submit. From now on, people will be careful, because the emperor's stench of happiness destroyed an entire state. He used the ducal family to intimidate others, and Mother couldn't believe there was no force that could resist him. In any case, no tyrant stays in power for long. If you look back through history, there is always another hero who dared to defeat the most powerful tyrant. The Duchess admitted that she would rather die of old age than have this happen, and she would probably have to start training herself. Louise didn't want to discuss such topics at all. She asked her husband if he had a tasty dinner. She was sure that tomorrow they would be able to eat something more delicious, and it was all thanks to her wonderful husband. And this meant only one thing: tomorrow the master must bravely get other tasty food for his family. Previously, Alex had no responsibilities on his shoulders, and everyone considered him soft-hearted. Now his eyes were darting around, and he clearly didn't expect to praise his wife, but she just wanted to stop thinking stupid things and start a new life. After a delicious dinner, the mother admitted that she would like to ask her son something and asked him to answer honestly. She asked if it was true that her son had not signed any slave contracts to borrow money for such a luxurious house. The heroine also thought that a person cannot simply change, and such changes occur when something truly shocking happens. Alex took his time answering, trying to figure out what to say so that his family would believe his words. And many were afraid that if he made money in a way that he could not tell anyone, and now it was his worst secret. The young man stated that he had not done anything of the sort and had merely sold information for which he had been generously paid. Mother never expected that the conversation would be about some kind of information, and none of the girls imagined that Alex could do something like that. Hoping that neither his mother nor his wife would be too picky, the young man simply had to come up with this story. He asked if anyone knew that the crown prince had disappeared from the palace, and he meant that same crown prince. The crown prince, named Ridditt, was the youngest son of the late emperor and was once a leading candidate for the throne. However, 4 years ago, due to the death of the emperor, power was gained by Axon Keisley, and he climbed to the throne by using force and removing all competitors. Axon claimed that he was ruling in the name of the main heir, who was only 3 years old at the time, and the pretext was the desire to deal with state affairs. Crown Prince Ridditt was locked up in the palace and then disappeared without a trace. Mother was sure he had been killed. It was clear to everyone that such a tyrant would not spare the life of even a child, and for him it was absolutely unimportant as long as he got the throne. Suddenly, Alex confessed that the crown prince was still alive, and in fact he was hidden from the emperor's eyes. As soon as Mother heard this information, she gasped in surprise, because everyone knew a different picture. According to Alex, there are people who are looking for the crown prince and are planning to organize an uprising led by Prince Ridditt. He is the main candidate for the throne. It seems that the uprising really must happen sooner or later. The young man told that he had given information about the location of the crown prince and had received money from the covenant. He was supposedly lucky enough to come across a clue that pointed to the location of the crown prince. Obtaining such information is very difficult, so the price for this information was correspondingly high, and Alex took advantage of this opportunity. For Mother, this was completely surprising, and since the crown prince was alive, then the presence of a clue explained everything. Neither the author nor the meaning of the book Distorted Sun were known to Alex, nor who exactly left this clue and why. Finally, the mother felt relieved when her son confessed everything in their days. Many things turned out to be lies, so they had to constantly ask questions about the truthfulness of everything that surrounded them. There was no room for relaxation. The emperor would not sit idly by, and Louise saw the crown prince as her only hope. Mother assured them that since they had found a new home, and now Alex was going to slaughter a lamb, and after that they should have a grand feast. Louise thought this idea was just wonderful. Tomorrow she was going to do a general cleaning and celebrate the housewarming. There would be quite a lot of work, but she just wanted the family to have fun. But this time there was one girl missing from the dinner. It seemed like the little sister was hungry, but Louise warned that next time there would be nothing left for her. The young lady promised to be on time for dinner from now on, and she didn't want to sit hungry at all. In a house where ghosts woke up only at night, the first night for the heroes began quite calmly. All this time, Louise felt a little nervous. She decided to go check the corridor to reassure herself that everything was in order. There were no strange rustling sounds in the house, and no strange footsteps were heard. They say that a real ghost has been seen in the mansion, but according to the heroine, nothing serious is happening here. Ghosts usually appear at night, so Louise decided to turn off all the lights and go to bed. And just as she was wondering what her husband was doing, she saw a dark silhouette in a robe in the distance. Approaching Alex, the lady asked with a smile why her dear husband was still awake. The gentleman assured her that it was already quite late, and after a hearty dinner, Louise needed to go to bed as soon as possible to finally get some proper rest. The heroine was a little late due to cleaning, and all this red tape with cooking turned out to be too tiring. Now she was really ready to go to bed, and she really wanted to know why Alex wasn't sleeping at such a late hour. She thanked him for talking to them over dinner, and she understood perfectly well that perhaps this conversation was not so simple. Alex had no idea that his wife was worried about him, and finally everything was fine now. Their lives changed dramatically after being expelled from their home. The caring lady admitted that she was sorry they had to bear all this alone, and she would be glad to help. The heroine realized this while waiting for Alex to return, and even if things were difficult for the two of them, together they could overcome any difficulties. Trying to get at least a little closer, the lady extended her hand to him, but Alex thanked her, feeling more confident, promising to remember her words. His wife warned him that if he had any problems, she would be happy to help him solve them, and now his words made her especially happy. Alex always said nice things, but now it was as if the situation was completely different, and suddenly she asked if her husband would mind if they finally lived in the same room. This hadn't caused any misunderstandings for Alex before, but now beads of sweat appeared on his face. Despite Alex's reaction, Louise couldn't back down now and wasn't ready to leave him alone for the night and prevent a repeat of the poison situation. She just wanted to be close, and marriage doesn't mean they have to fall asleep in each other's arms every time. For Alex, sharing a bed was terrifying, and it was bad, because the sweet girl really thought he was her husband. Of course, Louise was kind and beautiful, and also incredibly charming, but for this hero, she was a stranger. Holding her beloved husband close, Louise felt that warmth while he was unsure whether to tell the whole truth or leave everything as it was. As soon as Alex thought about this, he saw in front of him a gentle girl who was simply happy to be in the arms of her beloved. Despite everything, his wife felt Alex's tension. She felt better even from a simple hug, and was her loneliness really that strong? Louise may have been pretending not to want to rush things, but she was a girl, and she was hoping for a gentle touch in return. And even despite the threat of terrible ghosts, love and understanding still reigned in this house. Unfortunately, Alex could not yet become for her what he had been before, and gently pushing his beloved away from himself, he asked for forgiveness. He didn't find anything in me other than to just go to bed, but he really didn't want Louise to be upset. The hero had no other choice, and his wife naturally felt that she had just been rejected. Alex left without saying anything else, and Louise was just perplexed. She just wanted to sleep in the same room, and was he really that disgusted by her? Naturally, after this incident, the young man could not find a place for himself, and his ears burned with a bright fire. The gentleman's heart was pounding wildly, his legs were shaking, and he simply could not cope with his feelings. For the first time since their rebirth, they stood so close to the girl, who was sure that her lover was in front of her. From her gentle touch, a strange warmth spread throughout the young man's body, and he had never felt anything like it before. Louise had such fragile, tender, and velvety hands, and this girl also emanated a soft and incredibly pleasant aroma. The young man was shaken by his thoughts, because this girl was married to a completely different man. Now she saw him as her husband, and Alex had no choice but to try to play his new role. That night, the young man did not sleep a wink, and sitting on his bed, he spent the whole night thinking about the words spoken by Louise. She said something about marriage and sharing a bed, and she said it as if she and her husband really had a good relationship. And finally, Alex understood what was going on, and probably the previous hero was simply afraid of intimacy with this girl. There are probably circumstances for the new hero that he has been completely unaware of until now. Is this really a reward for saving the world? Alex was deprived of money, home, family, and on top of all this, he turned out to be useless in bed. For the protagonist, this punishment was worse than death itself, and it would have been better for him to drown in the depths of the ocean. In the past, the hero didn't even have time to use his device, because he was always a cold-blooded loner. Alex had never thought about intimacy with girls. He was only interested in monsters, and he decided it was time to think about it carefully. As Louise approached him, her body responded slightly to the gentle touches and the pleasant sensations of having a young lady nearby. In this life, Alex definitely didn't want to become the person they say can't do anything in bed. Having carefully examined the body, the young man realized that everything was perfectly fine with him, and he did not have to worry about anything. Perhaps the Duke was simply too shy, and that was why he couldn't even lie quietly next to his wife. In his past life, the hero had many temptations, but the girls who stuck to him only caused anger and irritation. For some reason, Lady Louise, when she was nearby, did not evoke such furious emotions, but Alex, on the contrary, wanted to be near her even more often. After the strange conversation with her husband, Louise felt upset because there really was nothing pleasant in this conversation. On the one hand, she was a little ashamed, because if she had known that everything would turn out like this, she would not have said a word to her husband. She was finally ready to go to bed, needing to turn off the light upstairs before getting into the comfort of her bed. Louise went up to the second floor, all the while thinking about how strange Alex had been acting and whether he had been able to sleep after that. The heroine was angry. For some reason, she still continued to think about what had happened and was completely unable to switch to anything else. Alex spoke up. He wants to become an ideal husband who, no matter what, will always be there for his wife. Now he was really surrounded by difficulties, but the gentleman tried to solve all the problems, even bought a house and somehow got rid of his stutter. Louise thought that after this they would finally live like a normal, happy family, and she couldn't believe that he really wanted to be with her. Or maybe he didn't want it in the first place, and if you think about it, Alex never expressed his feelings directly. If Louise and Alex were a married couple, she thought sharing a bed was normal, but she never thought about love or romantic feelings. And only now, walking down the dark corridor, the lady began to wonder if she really loved this man. Undoubtedly, Alex is very handsome and kind, which corresponded to the heroine's type, but can these feelings be called the very love that legends write about? It was already too late to think about this, because the couple had been engaged for a long time, and the heroine decided to stop thinking about all sorts of trifles and go to bed. She just wanted to quietly put out the candle, but suddenly she saw that the candle flame had already been extinguished, but she hadn't even touched it. The candle flame went out as if a strong wind had blown on it, but all the windows of the mansion were closed. Looking around, Louise was once again convinced that the wind really could not have blown from anywhere. She had specially slammed all the windows shut before going to bed to avoid freezing from the draft, so she was sure the fire couldn't go out on its own. The only thought that came to her mind was those same scary ghosts that appear only at night. There were rumors that the house was haunted, so everyone who lived there before spending even the first night left the house in terror. Louise closed her eyes and tried to die. These are just rumors, and everything has its explanation, and the candle probably went out due to some kind of draft. The heroine was tired of making up all sorts of nonsense. She decided to put out the remaining candles and ran to her bed. She was not alone in this gloomy, dark corridor, and a dark, ominous shadow had been watching Louise all this time. A huge baked steak, exuding a delicious herbal aroma, occupied a place of honor in the center of the table, surrounded by delicious spare ribs, thinly sliced ham, and homemade sausages. Even Louise herself never thought that such a day would ever come, and she would have to spend the whole morning cooking. If it weren't for Alex's help, she probably wouldn't have been able to deal with it. But in reality, she thought her husband didn't even know how to handle a kitchen knife. When Louise woke up, she immediately decided to go to the kitchen to prepare a grand dinner. That night, she slept very soundly, and when she entered the kitchen, she could already smell an incredible aroma. And not believing her eyes, Louise saw juicy marinated ribs in the kitchen, which had probably already been prepared by Alex himself early in the morning, and the rest of the lamb had already been cut up. Still in shock, Louise stood next to the fragrant meat and didn't even immediately notice how her husband called her. What surprised her most was that Alex actually killed the sheep and did it all with his bare hands. To be honest, the heroine didn't even expect anything like this from her husband. The meat looked like he bought it in a supermarket. Now she was ready to demonstrate her skills in preparing juicy, aromatic meat that everyone would surely remember for a long time. All this time, Alex was nearby and asked if his wife needed any help with cooking. Louise admitted that he had already done too much to ensure that everyone had a tasty lunch today, and she was sure it would be unfair to ask him to cook as well, and asked her husband to go to his room and just rest. She was still confused about what had happened yesterday, and it was difficult to be around Alex, who still insisted on helping. The heroine did not refuse and asked him to cut the meat into large pieces to cook a fragrant stew. The heroes looked like a happy married couple, doing things together from early morning. Who would have known that they would cook together, and the little sister could not even stand in front of such delicious dishes. At last the table was set. The aroma of meat filled the entire dining room, and this dinner certainly looked like a ducal one. Mother noted that it had been a long time since the table had been full of food, and they had not wanted for anything. These were the first dishes that Louise cooked with her husband, and when they lost everything she thought the end had come, but they really were able to overcome everything and throw a feast. And these dishes turned out to be much tastier than the usual ducal food prepared by the chefs. After taking the first bite of meat, the lady felt as if all the ingredients were having fun in her mouth, and it was incredibly delicious. The emotions were beyond words, and Louise looked at her beloved husband with tenderness. The young man admitted that his wife had done a great job, and that a lot of effort had indeed been put into this dinner. Louise understood that it was all thanks to Alex. It was he who got the tasty meat and helped prepare so many dishes in a short time. And it was unlikely that she would be able to find such a caring husband as the Duke anywhere else. The heroine did not know whether he really loved her, but this gentleman was a very nice person. The young man admitted that it wasn't difficult for him at all, but his wife was probably tired of getting ready in the morning, and this time his mother intervened in the conversation. She was indignant. Her son helped with the cooking. Of course he was a good boy, but doesn't the venerable gentleman have other concerns that are worth worrying about? Mother assured him that even if he was killed or was being flown away, he was still a duke and he needed to think about how to live on. Having asked to leave all the household chores to Louise, the lady promised to look for a chef in the meantime, and Louise didn't understand how she could even say such things after she had eaten all the prepared food, and every time this lady's words were not the most pleasant for her. Louise stated that it would be nice if there was someone who could do the job for her, but the Duchess would probably be very difficult to please. It was unlikely that anyone would agree to work in the middle of nowhere, and Louise could only think that the Duchess could help herself, or at least send her daughter. After some thought, the lady suggested hiring Albert, who had previously worked for them in the duchy and had served us for many years. She didn't think that this man would return after His Majesty's order. She herself had been working hard since early morning, and instead of gratitude, she had to listen to all sorts of nasty things from the Duchess. In general, the heroine should have gotten a divorce after everything that happened, and even now Alex would have sat and kept his mouth shut, as was the case before. Louise began to blush. He never contradicted his mother. Besides, it was hardly possible to say that the gentleman loved her that much. She certainly didn't expect to hear the words Alex addressed to his mother right then. Perhaps he decided to support her opinion, but she was not going to say anything more after he took her away. Suddenly, the young man declared that he considered it unfair that only he himself was responsible for the workpiece, and that no one else interfered with it. Never before had Alex dared to contradict either his sister or his mother, and only their word always carried weight. In his mother's opinion, he called her words unfair and decided to hire a servant, while his sister was thinking with all her might that this was not what her brother was trying to say. And was he really unhappy that only Louise was doing the cooking and she didn't take any part in it? Alex really meant it, and it starts with life in a shelter. Louise cooked food for everyone alone and never said anything against it. The younger sister's indignation knew no bounds. She declared that she couldn't do anything, and that it was really up to her mother, who had lived her whole life surrounded by servants, to do this. You can learn everything in this world, and the young man was sure that his sister and mother would definitely succeed if they tried to do something at least once. There was not a drop of deception in his words, but only good sincerity, and indeed all this time only his wife was engaged in cooking. Louise didn't expect to hear that Alex had finally stood up for her, and before that he had never dared to contradict his mother. Whenever they were alone, he always apologized for his mother's behavior, but never once approached her to find out the problem. The heroine never said she had a burning desire to run the household, especially alone, but now she was a spectator of a vivid performance where a brother and sister tried to prove something to each other. The mother said she heard her son, but suggested first hearing Louise's opinion on the matter to sort things out. And most of all, the lady did not want to participate in this at all, and it seemed like everyone was jumping on her right now, although she was just preparing food. Mother asked Louise if she would like her to help in the kitchen with her daughter, and the lady's look seemed to say that she should take on all the household chores. Louise admitted that she actually enjoys seeing everyone enjoying their food, but unfortunately she's not that good at cooking. And she suggested finding a cook because she definitely lacked culinary skills, and from that moment on, Louise admitted that she was not going to cook anymore. Apparently the two ladies didn't like this, and it meant that from now on, their place would be in the kitchen. If you think about it, it wasn't just about cooking. Louise cleaned the house, washed clothes and blankets, and she also had to blow out candles every day, and she couldn't leave everything to the mercy of fate. With a smile on her face, she admitted that there were a lot of other things to do in the house, and even if she stopped cooking, she would still have to clean. Therefore, Mother is still obliged to find a cook that she likes, and from now on she will certainly have delicious food. After his wife's words, Alex decided to divide the responsibilities equally so that no one would feel uncomfortable. The young man decided to take on all the hard work of looking after the sheep, as well as the washing, which requires a lot of effort. Alex was sure that now everyone would simply sort out their responsibilities, but instead, his mother just got up from the table and was probably getting ready to leave. She admitted that she was too disappointed in her son and thought he had simply lost his title, but now, in her opinion, he is ready to give up his pride. And no matter what he says, Alex is the head of a noble house, and the Duchess can never imagine him cleaning up after animals and dipping his hands in dirty water, preferring to see him die with honor. Now, in Alex's opinion, everything has changed, and he would be very grateful if his mother would simply support him. Despite all the circumstances, the Duchess remained a powerful and independent woman who was not ready to come to terms with the new reality. The lady slammed the door loudly and left the dining room, and she probably had no intention of sharing the duties of cleaning and cooking. Eloy was disappointed with her mother's behavior and admitted that she had never said that she did not like Lady Louise's cooking. Louise was grateful to her husband. He stood up for her for the first time. It seemed that his mother was now seriously angry, and even he did not think that she would be so upset. In part, the heroine understood her. She had been a noblewoman all her life, and their family had always been held in high esteem, and was close friends with the imperial family. She was simply glad that Alex took her side, and she certainly didn't think that she would be happy just because her husband covered her like a shield. The little sister asked if she had any extra food left, but unfortunately, Louise decided to make a different choice. There really was some tomato stew left in the pot, but this time the heroine decided it would be better to give the tasty treat to her husband. So the people asked for forgiveness, admitting that there was no more meat for today, and after that the little sister decided to simply go to her mother. Without batting an eye, the young Duchess headed towards her mistress to discuss everything that had happened at dinner. The heroine decided to serve the remaining food to her husband, who needed to restore his strength. Alex was the only one in this house who really thought about Louise, and she understood that he needed to be taken care of much more than the others. As Louise carefully placed food on the plate, the young man smelled an incredibly pleasant aroma from her hair. He froze in his tracks, staring intently into his wife's eyes as if he was seeing her for the first time. Suddenly, a system window appeared. The young man successfully completed the hidden task, and the system was unlocked after completing the first task. Alex was still spellbound and continued to look at Louise, who was carefully trying to feed him. The lady did not understand why he was looking so intently into her eyes, and it was as if he did not hear her at all. Snapping her fingers in front of his face, Louise tried to check if everything was okay with the gentleman. The young man only admitted mysteriously that in reality he was simply lost in thought and still could not stop thinking about his past life and problems with the Emperor. Ignoring the tasty treat, Alex decided he'd better head to his office right now to figure out what had happened in the system. The system window stated that if the player ignored Louise's sincerity, the reward would be on behalf of the player, and that they should enjoy the treat as soon as possible. Alex was sure he wouldn't see the stupid pink pop-up window again, but it still appeared again. In a previous life, the light from the system windows was blue, but now for some reason, it was a soft pink. It felt like the game the hero thought he'd completed had started all over again, from the very first level. The young man wondered if the system really thought he would do whatever it said as soon as it suddenly appeared. Alex decided to ignore all the pop-ups and no longer pay attention to the system, focusing on his own life. For some reason, the annoying pink window kept haunting the player, who no longer wanted to participate in anything. The window reminded that if the player ignored the sincerity, the reward would be cancelled, and this message required close attention. When talking about a reward, the system means increasing affection at the third point, but Alex was not a dating simulator, so he was not going to do anything stupid and did not even know why he needed to increase the indicators. And the final reward seemed to him as if the heroes had returned to the starting point where it all once began, but the system warned that it was not too late. Louise was originally Alex's wife, but the hero did not understand why he needed to improve his relationship with her. Moreover, he did not like the fact that he had to use her. The system notified that to level up, the player must accumulate affection, increase their level, and also defeat the tyrant and destroy the forces of evil. For some reason, confidence dropped by as much as 3 units, and the hero unexpectedly received a penalty for failing a task, despite having completed the tasks. Alex's title was that he was a heartless, useless husband, without the security of affection and with the lowest level. In his past life, his level was over 600, but now it's only 1. His profession remained the same, but if only his skills remained from his past life, then Alex could easily end up a tyrant. The skills were unavailable, and the hero hoped that he would at least be able to use the weapons from his past life, but as he thought, nothing came of it. The hero really couldn't do anything, and it didn't feel like a reward or a reward in the form of rest. It felt like a change of genre and starting life from scratch. While carefully scrolling through the notifications, Alex noticed a new section in the menu called Character List. It was probably all about the novel. Alex was a handsome man with an appearance that no one could compare to, which means his soul should be in this body, but it wanders in another world. Perhaps after death a person ends up in a completely different world, but where? And Alex did not have an answer to these questions. But if the hero returned again, what would happen to his soul then? The hero could not see the part hidden behind the question mark, and did not even know if he would ever be able to return to his former world. He was sure of one thing: Alex's body was fine. It was literally overflowing with mana, to the point that it could crush mountains. Mana is a fundamental force. It allows one to harness magical energy and gives one the ability to cast spells. However, in this world, magic is considered an implausible fairy tale, and it would be difficult to wield the power without knowing what it is. Alex's body contained pure mana in the most unadulterated form that had never been used before, and the owner of this body was not weak at all. The Duke must have instinctively used mana, but he never showed it, because if he could only show himself, he would have dealt with the tyrant. And this means the young man was a shy recluse for fear that his mana would one day break out. This evening Louise dined proudly all alone, and neither her mother nor her daughter showed up. Even after the food had cooled down, it still remained incredibly tasty, and the heroine was sorry that she had no one to share it with. Because her mother-in-law was creating tension in the atmosphere around her, the girl was unable to properly taste and enjoy the food. Despite her behavior, Louise still finished the delicious meat that she had cooked with her beloved husband, and was incredibly happy about it. After a delicious dinner, a mountain of dishes awaited her, and this was always a little tiring for the heroine. Cleaning and washing dishes alone was no easy task when there was a family of 4 to feed. Louise understood that it would be wonderful to have a cook or a servant, but in addition to the loss of property, the tyrant threatened to kill anyone who would help them. The weather outside was simply incredibly beautiful. The sun cast a bright light on the green hills around the luxurious mansion. The sheep were grazing near the house, and the heroine understood that they would not be able to eat them every day, and it was necessary to come up with a solution to the food problem. And only now a great idea came to her mind. What if she bought ready-made food at the market? Unfortunately, they had no money left, and Louise went in search of something to sell. To buy something necessary, you need to sell something unnecessary, and since she would probably have guests here with her soon, all this beauty was of no use. Louise walked into one of the luxurious rooms. She needed a medium-sized object that could be lifted, and you and the candlestick were perfect. They looked expensive, and the heroine was interested in whether she would be able to make good money from selling them. She needed to pack the home furnishings well to ensure they arrived safely at the nearest market. Joyful Louise, having wrapped the candlestick and porcelain vase in a snow-white blanket, got ready to go to the bedroom and go to the city. Suddenly, a candlestick and a vase, which were wrapped in a sheet, hit Louise on the head, and she fell down, losing consciousness. My head began to throb with unbearable pain. The world began to swim, crumbling into pieces before plunging into black oblivion. The vase and candlestick soared up to the ceiling, as if someone had lifted them up on purpose. The strangest thing is that as soon as Louise fell to the floor, the objects, as if nothing had happened, were back in their places. The porcelain vase stood next to the candlestick, as if no one had touched them for a long time. The room, which had been full of comfort just a minute ago, now turned into a chaotic landscape of collapse. Louise, like a broken doll, lay on the floor. At this moment, Alex was busy with important things and tried to feel how his body was filled with mana. The body was in a sensitive state because the gentleman had been suppressing the force for a long time. Even in a calm state, he felt strong pressure. Now the hero understood why he tried to be careful, especially if he considered the presence of mana to be a real disease. The Duke once mistook his mana for an illness and watched himself, afraid that his mother might escape from his body, but he certainly couldn't suppress it forever. When he was looking for a new home, he met the same owner of the haunted mansion. The man was trembling and offered the lowest price. He said that he tried to take things out of the mansion, but he kept fainting and passing out for long periods. The gentleman called a doctor and asked him to examine him, but it was useless. The house was definitely cursed, and the man was sure that if this continued, all the life would be sucked out of him. It was definitely not a good idea for the seller to say something like that, and the man would have been tormented by his conscience if he had kept silent and not told the whole truth. To find out if there really was a ghost in this house, the hero had to use his mana. The young man didn't particularly believe in ghosts, but it was worth checking. He needed to gather the mana scattered throughout his body into a circle, the center of which was in the area of the heart. Trying to feel the magical abilities, Alex gradually managed to do something, and the hero wasn't even sure that he could achieve anything in this body, but literally soon his heart was filled with raging energy. He succeeded. The gentleman was glad that in his past life he had already done something similar. This could be called the collected mana in the form of a ring. It was called a circle, and it denoted the stage of mana. The more circles, the more diverse magical attributes the hero can use, and at the moment the master only has one circle, but in the future he was confident that the number would be increased. After all, mana is fuel, and yet all passive skills were activated. So the young man was sure it was time to go in search of the ghost, but what awaited him was much more terrible than he could have imagined. With the help of magical power, he managed to find the source of dark magic that could not be hidden. Having gathered the mana in his body, the hero once again became convinced that he had found the ghost that was wandering around the mansion. The ghost really does exist. The gentleman felt the presence of someone's spirit in the reception room on the first floor, and since it is still daytime, it is better to lure it out so that the family does not bump into the ghost. The previous owner said that he tried to take things out of the mansion, and probably the ghost is possessed by things, and perhaps it will appear if Alex tries to take something out. As soon as he entered the room, Alex's heart began to beat like a bird in a cage. He rushed towards his wife, not feeling the floor under his feet. He didn't believe in ghosts, but at that moment rational thinking gave way to a primal fear, a sense of impending doom. He took a hesitant step forward, as if afraid to disturb the fragile boundary between the world of the living and the dead. The young man rushed towards her, knelt down and listened to her breathing, weak, intermittent, but it was there. A fragile hope flared in her chest. Like a spark in pitch darkness, Alex carefully lifted her head, laying it gently on his lap. He carefully picked her up in his arms, like a crystal vase, and carried her out of the room, holding her tenderly to himself. After checking her breathing and pulse, he made sure everything was fine, and as soon as he took her in his arms, he couldn't believe that a person could be so light. It seems that all the other family members were also fast asleep, and if they wake up, then it is definitely the work of a ghost. The young man laid the unconscious girl on the bed and was sure that she should not wake up during the whole night. Now he needed to deal with this very ghost that dared to harm his wife. Feeling something strange, the young man realized that the ghost was approaching and was still hiding somewhere in the corners of the luxurious palace. Perhaps Louise lost consciousness due to the black smoke that appeared, and the hero decided it would be better not to inhale it just in case. Black smoke gradually spread throughout the room, and Alex tried to stop it with the help of his magical abilities. And as soon as he struck the magical creature, a notification came. The opening of the afterlife was unlocked, and upon arrival, the hero would be able to regain the necromancer's abilities. This was the profession Alex had in his past life, and he realized that he absolutely had to go back, and then he had a faint hope. A sinister demon has been caught in a magical trap, and Alex will finally be able to see the creature that is preventing all the residents from living peacefully. It was not at all an evil, huge ghost with a bunch of teeth and sharp horns, and most of all this baby looked like a snow-white puppy. The ferocious little one bared his teeth and growled angrily, wondering if the master would see him. Alex had just started using this mana, but already understood a lot about ghosts, and immediately decided to ask if people were really losing knowledge because of him. The little ghost said that people who inhaled his smoke would not be able to wake up just like that. The ability to rip people out without being a monster seems like a normal ghost, but is there some strange story behind this little puppy? The ghost's name was Gideon. He said that he had to guard this house until the owner came, and asked Alex to get out of here immediately. Gideon was a ghost that only affected people, and it was certainly not normal for something like that to appear from an ordinary house, which was neither a monster nor a spirit. It seemed like something was pushing Alex to become a necromancer again. Perhaps the system had specifically created this ghost so that he would hire him as his familiar. The young man asked to tell his story, but the little ghost growled he was just waiting here for his master. One day he woke up in a warm place and there was no one there, but the puppy remembered how the owner told him to guard the house well. The snow-white puppy promised to do this and was not ready to allow anyone else to live in this house. It seemed that his memories were fragmented. The ghost warned that if the young man touched anything in this house, he would feel the effect of smoke. Mana was being used up when the passive resistance skill took effect, and now Alex found it incredibly useful, and the skill activated when the circle closed. For some reason, even despite the white smoke, the young man was still conscious, although he should have already fallen dead. Now Alex understood how the ghost drove people away, and he declared that no, this mansion belonged only to him, and the ghost needed to surrender. The puppy refused, promising that the owner would definitely return, and continued to scare people so that no one would dare to settle here. And since Alex didn't understand in simple words, the ghost was ready to show what he was capable of. Instead of small paws, he now had huge wolf legs with sharp long claws. And the little ghost, resembling a puppy, turned into a huge wolf with fierce yellow eyes, ready to attack at any moment. The flaming eyes glowed with hellish fire, and the ghost asked everyone to leave the mansion immediately, otherwise a painful death awaited all the inhabitants. His howl, piercing and ominous, swept through the rooms, causing the walls to shake and the candles to go out. It seemed Alex had no other choice. Gideon recognized his adult form, and his fighting power doubled. He turned into a huge wolf, the embodiment of primal fear and unbridled rage. The pup's ghost grew, swelling to incredible proportions, its fur covered in frost, its fangs growing to the size of daggers, and its eyes filling with crimson flame. With each passing second, his presence became more and more noticeable, his power over the mansion absolute. Alex deftly dealt with the Gideon, the ghost wolf, not with magical passes or spells, but with something much more prosaic, yet effective. Alex knew the ghost was sad, but he needed to calm down, and he suggested forgetting the man from whom he hadn't heard for a long time and finding a new owner. The young man could not miss such an opportunity to acquire a profession, and he needed to make the ghost his familiar before it could believe that its owner had abandoned it. Time was limited. The young man understood that he needed to hurry and let Gideon know as quickly as possible that he was not in danger. First of all, Alex needed to restrict the movements of the huge wolf so that he would not be injured under any circumstances. Using the skills from his past life, the young man, with a light wave of his hand, used magical power to bind the snow-white wolf into a magic ring. Gideon was bound by magical chains, and the young man asked if he really wanted to know why he could resist him. Gideon began to appear less frequently, and instead of the terrifying wolf, Alex saw only the ghost of a small puppy sadly looking at the fire in the fireplace. Now Alex could call himself its new master, but unfortunately the ghost was wounded. For such a wound, one circle of magic is enough. Gideon continued to fiercely resolve that in this world he had only one most important master, whom he would never betray. Here Alex had to prove that not only his owner could be a good person. The young man claimed that he was its new owner, so he could talk to it and heal its wounds, and moved into the house to find it. The ghost could not believe it. In his opinion, this could not happen, and his previous owner could not leave him alone. Alex tried in every way to prove that the ghost should believe him, and even told him his real name. Gideon was confused. He temporarily lost the will to fight, but a second later he was ready to attack again, so the young man had very little time. When he heard about the ghost, he didn't have high expectations, but putting people to sleep was quite unusual. Having created a huge magic ring, the ghost Gideon was forced to submit and become a servant of his new master. Driven out by force but calmed by attention and compassion, Alex did not defeat the ghost, he helped it find peace. Finally, the mission was accomplished, the dangerous smoke disappeared, and Alex immediately went to his sister's bedroom, but for some reason no one had woken up yet. The little puppy stated that the girl simply wanted to sleep, and that there were no harmful substances in its smoke that could affect deep sleep. This time the young man decided to believe him and keep an eye on his wife for a long time to make sure everything was okay with her. Long, dark eyelashes lay serenely on pale cheeks, and lips, usually full of life and laughter, were now slightly parted in quiet sleep. Watching his wife sleep was a little strange for Alex because she had been suffering lately and he just wanted to let her rest. That night everything seemed to be calm, and after the encounter with the ghost, he finally fell silent and left Louise alone. Lady Louise was still fast asleep, and during all this time she had not even woken up once. On her skin, light traces of the recent shock were still visible. Pale, translucent bruises reminded her of yesterday's nightmare. Even though the heroine had been planning to go to the market all day, she was so tired that she couldn't even get up. Suddenly, the little sister flew into the room and screamed loudly, "It's time for Louise to get up!" When she woke up, the heroine did not understand how long she had slept, but she felt rested, but at the same time restless. Eloy pointed her finger at Louise and asked why she was sleeping for so long, since it was already evening and it was time for a delicious dinner. Looking out the window, the lady realized that she had slept almost the entire day, and it had long been dark outside. Probably many were left without food, and Eloy also woke up only after lunch. She called for food, and to her surprise the food was almost ready. Louise felt strange. Her head was completely empty, but she clearly remembered how she took the vase and candlestick. She went down to the living room as quickly as possible to check on the very objects that had somehow hit her on the head. The things she wanted to sell were still in the same place, and the heroine couldn't understand whether she was too tired and had dreamed it all. Louise was completely confused and a little perplexed by the strange situation. Mother sat proudly on the sofa and asked if the lady had just woken up and had probably managed to get enough sleep during this time. Louise didn't want to listen to her instructions at all, and only stated that a very interesting situation had occurred. Mother was unhappy because of Louise. The head of the duchy was busy in the kitchen instead of her, and the heroine didn't even suspect that Alex would go and cook. She rushed to the kitchen when her sister said that the food was ready. She didn't immediately understand what she meant, and it turns out that Alex was preparing dinner all this time. The pleasant aroma of freshly baked meat and potatoes wafted from the kitchen, but Alex wasn't the only one here. Lady Eloy was carrying the plates, and apparently she had no choice now that Louise had refused to do the cooking. The kitchen was bustling with activity. Alex was serving and serving food, and the heroine didn't understand what was going on. When she saw her husband, her sleep seemed to vanish, and Alex had never cooked before. Now he looked like the ideal man from any noble lady's dream, who asked her how she felt after a long sleep. She slept for so long that her husband even began to worry that she would never wake up again. Everything was perfectly fine. It's just that the heroine was very tired these days, and she didn't even notice how she slept for so many hours. Perhaps the softness of the bed affected the amount of sleep she got, but as soon as Louise saw the richly laid table, she was completely speechless. The little sister boiled the eggs, cut the tomatoes, and even set out the plates. Her beloved brother did the rest. The gentleman had simply seen others cook many times, so he admitted that he simply repeated it and was not sure whether it would be tasty. The food looked very appetizing, and Louise couldn't be happier with her happiness. Even the proud daughter of the Grand Duke worked in the kitchen, and the lady did not think that she would ever live to see this moment. Of course, she wouldn't do anything for no reason, so Eloy immediately asked her to prepare something tasty for her in the future. The family gathered again around the sumptuously laid table, and everyone prepared to try incredibly delicious dishes. Every day, someone tried to do everything to make sure that others were happy, contented, and simply fed. And the heroine was incredibly grateful to Alex for the care and respect he began to show towards the family. After biting into a piece of shrimp, she was very curious about what her beloved husband's food tasted like. The ladies tried Alex's dish for the first time. They couldn't believe the incredible aroma, and the gentleman seemed to have the talent of a chef. Louise didn't know where her husband got such abilities from. He definitely has a talent for cooking. The wife happily declared that the food was incredibly delicious, and her husband was a simply divine cook, with skills that even the most famous chef in the empire would envy. The embarrassed gentleman admitted that he was incredibly happy with how much the whole family enjoyed his treats, into which he had put his strength and soul. Never before had the Duke been so caring, but now everyone felt a completely different aura from him. When Alex wanted to enjoy his meal, a pink notification window suddenly appeared right in front of the table. The system congratulated the hero, and another point was added to his affection, which meant that his talents and skills were soaring. For some reason, the affection suddenly increased, and the gentleman did not understand whether the reason for this was simply an ordinary dinner. Having prepared it quickly, it somehow affected the increase of affection towards his wife, and Alex would never have thought that in his past life it could be useful. The young man felt a little uneasy about the fact that this girl would have a crush on him, and he wondered if he cooked a large amount of food, the affection would increase even more. It was a great way to improve his skills, but besides that, he could please his lover from the novel. After a hearty dinner, Louise and her husband spent time together, while the lady still could not calm down. She tried to remember, hadn't she really tried to sell them? Had she really just dreamed it all? Louise was upset. Nothing would happen, and wondering why this house was said to be haunted, the lady asked for candles, after which she fell into a deep sleep. Mother had never seen any ghosts here, and her sister was afraid to even hear about them, and they would definitely appear if she constantly mentioned them. Nothing strange happened to Alex, as if the rumors about ghosts would turn out to be just rumors. Alex simply stated that he had not noticed anything unusual. He really hoped that everything was fine, and that there was no need for any extra reasons to worry. Or perhaps the ghosts mistook them for their owners, so the hero asked his wife not to worry too much. A strange self-confidence emanated from him, and the heroine decided that it was necessary to solve problems as they arose and not think about anything else. Every night from that moment on was calm, and the young man that evening could not tear himself away from important matters in his office. He tried to understand the system of the game, and the gentleman studied its peculiarities every evening, trying to find answers to his questions. Today was a very long day. In the morning he slaughtered a lamb, then dealt with a ghost, and in the evening he cooked dinner. Since his profession has now been unlocked, the skills associated with the profession have also become useless, so to increase the number of subordinates, Alex must either level up or accept special tasks. Little Gideon was circling around him, also curious to see if his master had managed to choose a new task. He had no choice but to tame the little ghost, so that he would no longer yearn for his former master. Alex stroked the puppy's head and warned him that he should not be seen again. Having become his servant, the little ghost began to follow him everywhere, and the master had to warn him in advance, so that he would be careful if he accidentally met someone other than him. Safety was paramount for the little ghost, and to avoid unnecessary questions, he told him the whole truth. If you remember history, there is always a main character who will one day come and save the civilians. The hero felt as if the world had called him to defeat the main evil, which meant he needed to level up, defeat the tyrant, and destroy the forces of evil. And the hero constantly did not understand why he had to go through the process of saving the world twice. In every story, this man was the one who would come and defeat evil, saving civilians from destruction, pain, and disappointment. For some reason, this time he had to improve completely different skills that he did not have before. Alex couldn't understand why in this novel he needed to increase affection, which was the most difficult thing for him. The lives of Louise and the Duke's family changed dramatically after they moved into a luxurious mansion, where even cute sheep roamed the grounds. Mother wondered if sheep had always been the kind of animals that moved so awkwardly. Louise laughed and was sure that the reason was the thick fur that made these animals too unwieldy. She even happily offered to shear the sheep together and sell the expensive wool, which could bring in a large profit. Despite Louise's enthusiasm, the Duchess still had no intention of doing menial work, and was sure that this was the work of other people, and she should only rule and be a proud lady, trying on new outfits every day. They say that this type of work is not so physically demanding and helps to eliminate distracting thoughts, which is beneficial for mental and physical stability. The Duchess categorically refused even the slightest physical activity and intended to stay at home until the sheep began to recognize her. The lady refused without any hesitation and went into the mansion, while Louise thought about how she could cope alone. Physical labor is truly beneficial for health, and the heroine tried in every way to maintain the family life so that no one would want for anything. Every day she cooked food, cleaned, and now she needed to deal with shearing the sheep. In the closet, she found the necessary tools, which were already dusty because they had not been used for a long time, but most importantly, they were there and in working order. Alex was able to buy a house, but expenses were still a major concern, and Louise knew it was time to do something productive and needed a regular income. The lady put on gloves and was ready to start any hard work, if only it would help the family even a little. The little lamb no longer looked so scary, he moved more heavily than everyone else, and he had the calmest character. So Louise decided to start with him, and really hoped that she would definitely be able to shear the fur from the sheep. The tools had long since become dull, but the fur was cut quite easily, and at that moment Louise began to think that perhaps she too had her own talents. While the sheep grazed in the sunlit meadow, Louise slowly sheared the wool, which had already become tattered. She really thought that everything would be much worse, but after the haircut, and she had excess weight, her back began to fall apart a lot. It seems Louise managed to shear one lamb, and it yielded a whole sack of wool. A contented lady in a dress was dragging a sack, remembering, it seemed, that there was a dusty cart in the warehouse. On the way she met Alex, who asked where his dear wife was heading. Louise happily admitted that she was going to the market to sell sheep wool, and that her husband might want to go with her. Alex couldn't believe that his wife, wearing a dress, had actually sheared a lamb herself, and even decided to sell the wool she got. Without hesitation, he decided to go with Louise, and even if his help with the purchase was not needed, he would at least be able to drag the heavy bag. With the bag slung over his shoulders, Alex looked like a warlike knight who had managed to catch the long-awaited prey. The bag was quite heavy, but Alex lifted it with one hand, and Louise wondered if after a long time they would finally be alone. Perhaps this evening could have been quiet and calm, if not for the little sister, who immediately noticed that they were definitely going somewhere. Eloy was already running towards them, while Louise did not want to go with the three of them, or wanted to spend time with her husband. With tears in her eyes, the young lady asked to be taken along, assuring him that she had not seen people for 100 years, and that it was incredibly boring here. The heroine couldn't even imagine how to refuse this girl more gently, but she definitely didn't want to go with the three of them. Louise asked if she was sure she wanted to go, and that the local market was different from the capital's, with completely different goods and streets. Louise almost managed to persuade her too, and she really wanted to go with Alex without strangers. They had almost set off together, and the heroine certainly didn't expect that her little sister had been waiting for them to leave all this time. She couldn't help but nudge the newlyweds in the shoulder, declaring that this time she would definitely go with them so as not to die of boredom at home. Louise probably did a very bad job of playing the villain. No matter how hard she tried, Eloy still got her way. Here, in the market square, a different life pulsed, the life of ordinary people busy with their daily concerns. The date with Alex hadn't been a success, and Louise knew it was unlikely that another opportunity would arise anytime soon. But alas, Eloy was already with them. The young lady simply complained about how the local market really was radically different from the capital's. Louise did warn her and said that next time she would just better stay home. The scent of spices mingles with the aroma of fresh bread, creating a unique bouquet, and the voices of merchants compete to offer their wares. Everyone here was looking for something, bargaining, and exquisite goods could be purchased, and in this chaos a special harmony reigned. Come to think of it, Alex had been incredibly quiet this whole time, and it was completely unlike him. At the market, you can feel the pulse of the city, its soul and its heart, but the heroine hadn't been out anywhere for a long time, and now everything looked different here. Despite the huge abundance of goods, most people looked exhausted and tired from the tedious work. The emperor's tyranny made it increasingly difficult for people to survive, and the difference was obvious. While the heroes were looking for a suitable shop, Alex finally noticed something similar, and the young lady was almost completely exhausted. Alex went first, holding a huge bag in his hands, and loudly asked if there was anyone in the trading shop. The merchant probably didn't really expect to see anyone, and there really weren't any people in the room. He would even be surprised to find out what had brought the heroes to a trading shop that few people visit. To his great surprise, Alex offered to buy sheep wool and was even willing to provide the precious commodity. The quality of the sheep's wool was quite good. The merchant offered 10 coins for a whole sack. Louise immediately offered to raise the price, and in return promised to supply wool within a certain time frame in the future. The price was indeed good, but the merchant suddenly declared that if the heroes needed money, they would need to sell something else. Nobody understood what they were talking about, and all they could offer was sheep's wool. Suddenly, the man began to look at the heroine strangely, as if he was intently assessing her with his gaze. At that moment, Louise realized that he had been looking at her hair all this time. It seemed that the whole thing was precisely in her long, luxurious curls. The hair was so wonderful that the merchant was ready to buy it, but Alex was against it. He said something stupid. They came here to sell wool, and the merchant shouldn't have any more questions. For as long as Louise could remember, aristocrats had always envied her hair, which sparkled like the northern lights when the light hit it. The heroine was always very pleased to hear such compliments, because only she was worthy of them. For some reason, aristocrats always tried to find out from Louise what products she used, and some of them even wanted to cut off a lock of her hair. Therefore, the merchant was not the first to notice that the lady had naturally incredible, stunning hair, and people always paid special attention to it. The mere thought of people wanting to have another person's hair as an ornament sounded absolutely terrifying to Louise. Before, she would have refused immediately, but now they were offered a large sum, and Louise was even ready to cut off her luxurious locks. Despite her desire to help the family, Alex was unperturbed and insisted that they had come here to sell the sheep's wool. The merchant even apologized for his rudeness, but a young lady intervened in the conversation, offering to cut off some hair and receive at least some money. Eloy wasn't worried. It wasn't about her hair. It would grow back very soon, and she was even ready to accept the merchant's terms. The man insisted that a little more hair would be needed, but her brother's angry voice made the lady come to her senses. Without even thinking, the young duchess offered to sell Louise's hair, and she knew perfectly well that her brother's wrath awaited her. Alex stated that this was not about her hair, and she had no right to make decisions on issues that did not concern her. Louise didn't want to feel the tense atmosphere at all, and on the one hand she felt incredibly sorry for the stupid little girl. She asked Alex not to be so angry. To be honest, she herself was thinking about agreeing to the offer, and her hair would really grow back. Despite all the difficulties, the young man was still not ready to make such extreme sacrifices. Louise didn't want him to bear all the expenses on his own, and she really wanted to help the family somehow, and selling hair, in her opinion, wasn't that bad. Alex didn't see any need for it, and understood that selling sheep's wool and hair was a completely different matter. He warned that even if it ever becomes harder than it is now, she should never sacrifice her beauty. And he didn't want to become a man who sells his wife's hair in order to one day make ends meet and finally have a tasty dinner. For Alex, it was all really that serious, and Louise, who was already one step away from cutting her hair, did not expect such behavior from her husband. He showed care and respect, it seemed, and the merchant at that moment was completely an extra person in this room. Fortunately, the hair cutting was avoided, and when the ladies left the shop, they were left with their hair. Suddenly, a system window appeared. Affection increased again, but the hero could not understand why this happened. This time it seemed like nothing special happened, and Alex simply said that he didn't want to be the man who sells his wife's hair. He did what his heart demanded, and now the hero needed to understand why the attachment continued to grow. He managed to find information. Affection makes him stronger, and special skills are unlocked when the level of affection increases or when the couple receives a command from Louise. The information didn't really help Alex solve the mystery, and he decided he needed to go home and think some more. Turning to the ladies, the young man suggested that they go back into the house to sort out the money they had managed to find. Despite the awkward situation, Louise was still happy to spend time with Alex, as well as his young sister. To be honest, he didn't even know how people could be so desperate. It was shocking, and selling hair sounded absurd. Alex wasn't completely crazy, so he couldn't allow something like this to happen. He warned that he would like to stop by the information desk. Louise was surprised because she had no idea where the information office was. Alex already knew the place and said that the necessary bureau was located in a town called Rudin. When he told her the name of the city, Louise became incredibly worried and asked him if he was sure she would be completely okay. Louise was worried that the Duke would be bullied, and Alex had experienced something similar several times, and now he wondered whether he should tell his wife other information. Since he had already been away for a couple of days, he was sure that nothing could happen to him during this time, but Louise did not want to go that far, and his little sister didn't want to meet anyone at all. especially if they were aristocratic acquaintances. Indeed, nobles are frequent visitors in Rudin, and Eloy will likely run into someone she knows if she goes there. Rudin was famous for being the noisiest and most luxurious city in the empire. All the artisans renowned for their craftsmanship had shops here, and aristocrats were frequent visitors to the city. The nobility who visited the Rudin often showed off their extravagant jewelry, clothing, and hairstyles. That's why Louise was worried. They were still wearing the same clothes they were wearing when they were kicked out of the duchy, and that was a bad sign. Louise was ready to send him away alone and go home with her little sister, but today was not an ordinary day. The ladies chatted pleasantly and enjoyed a pleasant walk, while the Duke looked after them and thought about what he should do for himself so that the girls would never want for anything. He still couldn't understand whether his wife was really ready to cut off her luxurious hair in order to get at least a little money. It was a rather strange feeling, and it probably came to the hero because of his sense of responsibility for the whole family. He called Gideon to escort the girls home unnoticed, as they were very visible, and the Duke was worried that something might happen to them. Louise got home without any problems and eagerly awaited her husband's return, sipping aromatic hot tea. It was already midnight, but Alex still hadn't arrived, and she was worried that something might not go according to plan on the way. For some reason, he went to the information desk. Perhaps he read a book. The heroine had a lot of thoughts in her head, so she decided to just go out and breathe. The weather was chilly outside, and Alex's words from that afternoon were still swirling around in Louise's head. Today he made it clear that if things got any harder, he would never be the kind of man who sold his wife's hair to make ends meet. In fact, the heroine was already ready to sell the happiness of her hair, but she was afraid that such an act would upset Alex and hoped that he would return safe and sound. The trees in the garden seemed to hold their breath, awaiting the arrival of the night guest. In the twilight, Louise clearly saw the carriage. Her heart was pounding wildly in her chest, and Alexandre's movements were slow and tired. Alex arrived in a carriage, sitting proudly like a triumphant man returning from a brilliant victory. The gilded upholstery sparkled in the rays of the setting sun, casting reflections on the impeccably groomed flanks of the black horses, throwing back their heads in time to the jingling of their bells. An atmosphere of well-being and power reigned all around, permeated by the quiet rustling of leaves and the barely perceptible scent of roses wafting from the surrounding gardens. Louise hadn't seen him so happy and radiant in a long time, as if he had just dealt with an army of monsters. The gentleman never expected that his wife would wait for him until late at night, and in his opinion, she was already sleeping peacefully in a warm, cozy bed. Wondering what his wife was doing there, he decided to ask why Louise was still awake. The heroine simply went out to get some fresh air, and all this time she stood by the window and wondered when her husband would return. Alex apologized for arriving late. He was sure his wife was already fast asleep and not worried about anything. What she was most interested in now was how Alex had managed to get his hands on a luxurious horse-drawn carriage. Alex bought all this because he thought it was hard to constantly walk without walking, and calling a cab every time was not very convenient. That's why he went to the town of Rudin. The carriage was similar to what they had used before, and it looked just as expensive. It might be worth a fortune, and an embarrassed Alex suggested that the girl go inside to take a look. It seemed that everything had worked out well, and the lady had only worried in vain. But why did the gentleman still look so tense? Carefully opening the carriage door, he was sure that Louise would now be in complete shock. It was impossible to believe her eyes what she saw in the carriage, and just recently they had been eating only potatoes. Now inside the carriage lay huge chests of jewels, and this meant that the poverty of life could be forgotten forever. When Alex opened the door with a sweeping gesture, she was struck not by the glitter of gold and the sparkle of gems, but by their incredible number. Velvet shimmered in the dim light, and diamonds, rubies, and emeralds sparkled in the sunset. The lady even asked again whether all the huge chests were really filled with jewels and coins. The Duke's family had always lived in prosperity before that incident, but Louise had never seen jewels stacked like that in chests. This wealth would change their lives. Questions arose in their heads, but Alex warned once again that while he was here, Louise would no longer have to worry about money. The sheer scale of what I saw took my breath away. It wasn't just wealth, it was a dream come true. The night spent discussing plans and calculating potential income seemed like a dream, and only the mountains of jewelry sparkling in the morning rays confirmed that it was reality. The next morning was filled with sunshine and new life, and the Duchess and her daughter could not believe that they were now rich again. The Duchess, accustomed to luxury and power, could hardly contain her joy. She was already making plans on how to regain her position in society and how to outshine her envious rivals. Amidst this general rejoicing, a vague uneasiness was growing in Louise's soul. She could not shake off the thought that there was some secret behind this wealth, that behind the glitter of the jewels there was hidden the shadow of danger. Waking up, the heroine was in incredible shock, remembering the previous night when Alex arrived in a brand new carriage. The first thing Eloy and her mother-in-law did was call the owner of a fashion boutique and buy all the products featured in the latest brochure. Every day, all sorts of luxury items were delivered to the mansion, and Louise began to think that she too needed to buy a few outfits. Moreover, Alex invited a chef, which meant opening a small family restaurant next to the mansion, due to the emperor's order. Fortunately, this had a huge advantage: the lady would no longer have to cook for herself. So now her morning was completely free, and Louise went in search of her husband. He was nearby in the garden, probably sorting out past ducal matters in order to renew his title. She called Alex's name in a cheerful voice, wishing to get at least a little attention that morning. Every time the gentleman saw her, he seemed to try to hide somewhere far away. This time Louise managed to catch him and told him that the food ordered at the restaurant had just been delivered, and this morning they can worry about nothing and finally go have a snack in peace. The Duke understood Louise's worries and anxieties, but for some reason today his head was occupied by all sorts of thoughts. Louise smiled so brightly she was sure that it was her husband in front of her, but what would happen if she found out the truth? Alex understood that his conscience would gnaw at him. The only reason he had earned so much money was because the gentleman felt responsible for everyone with whom he now had to live. And he would never have thought of carrying so much gold and jewelry if it weren't for his family and ladies who needed to be provided for. Louise seemed to be very pleased as the main food problem had been solved. Every time Alex sold information, he made large sums of money, and ironically, other metrics went up at an incredible rate. The heroes didn't intend to do this with the aim of increasing affection, but hoped that it would happen on its own, and it turns out that money won't help here. He also recently managed to find out information that since the marriage of convenience with her husband, Louise has not entered into a closer relationship with him, but Alex decided to make her, that this does not bother him. Now he had completely different questions, and he certainly wasn't going to think about how to get closer to his wife. The level of affection was still at 2, and perhaps only closer proximity would help to increase the value. Alex hadn't planned to do this before, but now he was worried about these stupid numbers. The hero's head was splitting more and more, and he didn't understand how to influence the game's statistics. Every time the hero was alone, he tried to think of a more detailed plan to come up with something. The moment Alex finally fell asleep, he felt as if he was being enveloped by boundless darkness. The shadow of the past haunted him like a ghost, reminding him of the tragedy that had changed his life forever. The darkness was replaced by a bright light, and the crying boy seemed familiar to the hero, as if he felt his pain. Tears streamed down his cheeks, leaving wet tracks on his dirty shirt, small and lost, the echo of his sobs dissolving into the void. The stronger his desire to help became, the further the boy eluded him, plunging deeper and deeper into the abyss of despair. Suddenly, a strong pain rushed through the hero. It seemed that he was experiencing someone else's feelings and emotions right now. The shadows of frightening figures began to thicken around. They whispered something unintelligible, accusing, as if trying to awaken sleeping nightmares. It turns out that this crying boy turned out to be little Duke Alex, whose childhood was not at all rosy. His father's contempt, his poisonous looks, his insults, all of this was part of his life. The father hated the young Duke, and when he entered the office, he struck him with a whip. The blow landed on his shoulder, and the skin burned painfully through the thick fabric of his waistcoat. Alex looked at him silently. Trying not to give in to anger, he knew that any excuses would only make his father even more angry. With each blow, the father screamed louder and louder, "The boy can't do such a simple thing that every child is capable of." The young master never understood why he had to endure such a cruel father, and he only silently agreed with his opinion. His father came once a month and checked whether Alex was studying hard and whether he had found a cure for his stuttering, but the boy was still doing the same. The father could not believe that the duchy would have to be left to such a weakling as the young master, and every time he called him a non-entity. Hatred burned in his father's eyes like the flames of hell, and the boy was never welcome anywhere. One day the thought occurred to him that it would be better if he had never been born than to endure constant humiliation from his father. Young Alex endured everything, and every month on his orders he came to this gloomy office. He walked in trying to keep a straight face, although inside he was clenching with fear and hatred. And every time he entered the office he heard angry shouts, his father arguing with his wife, who, in his opinion, had done nothing for her successor. The reason these people were always quarreling was because of the young Duke, and he had understood this very well from his youth. Alex listened silently, trying not to show any emotion. He understood that any attempt to object would only make the situation worse. One day his father invited him to dinner, and with childish interest, Alex decided that perhaps he wanted to ask about the book he had read the day before. Suddenly the gentleman declared that the boy's table manners were still terrible, and he had previously warned him not to jingle the cutlery. His father's scream made Alex want to run away as far as possible and never return to this place again. While they were still eating dinner, the father suddenly announced that poison had been added to one of the 2 plates. And he is ashamed that after himself he left only one successor, if you have a stutterer, and today one of them will definitely die, and all the problems will be solved at once. Of course, Alex didn't want to die and wanted to try. I wish his father had waited a little longer, and he always wanted to become a son that someone would be proud of. But it was too late. A sharp pain in his throat made the boy fall to the floor, but even on the brink of death, he only wanted his father not to scold him for simple rules of conduct. The plate of poison ended up in the boy's hands, but unfortunately he couldn't believe that his father would turn out to be like that. He saw only his last hateful look, saying that he only hoped that in the next life the boy would be born as someone more tolerable. After strange and long, exhausting visions, the hero finally woke up lying in his bed. The light seemed bright today, but for some reason the strange dream seemed to last a long time, and the young man even felt a sudden pain in his back. Immediately going to the mirror, Alex took off his robe and saw huge scars on his back. Apparently, the old pain had returned to haunt him, and huge scars had appeared on his muscular body, indicating a terrible childhood. Until this moment, the hero had not noticed the wound, which meant that it was not a dream, but real memories imprinted in Alex's body. It turns out he lived his whole life with scars on his back and was subjected to cruel and suspicious treatment. Now more was known about this man's body, and he could not at all treat this boy as a stupid stutterer. Luckily, Alex managed to throw on his robe before his radiant wife appeared in the doorway. Since the lady was no longer burdened with cooking, she was incredibly happy every day and noticed that Alex woke up later than usual today. She even laughed. This is so unusual for a person who wakes up before the roosters. Louise's presence seemed to burst into his dark and gloomy sleep like a bright ray, and the young man slept well today. The young lady had just bought some new clothes and wanted to take them out for a walk. Now that they had a carriage, Louise was planning to go to a larger area. She understood that the young man did not need to go, but the ladies wanted to visit the city center, which was a little further than the market. Alex agreed. Louise was incredibly happy, warning that she and Eloy would be waiting for him downstairs. Seeing his wife in such a wonderful mood was an incredible joy for Alex, and he realized that all this was being done for a reason. Today, the heroes arrived in a city located near the center of the empire, and here the luxury of a large city was already felt. For some reason, it was incredibly cold here, but this wasn't even the city that was located in the far north. Looking around, the young lady did not like the gloomy, strange atmosphere at all. There is probably not a single place in the empire where the land could bear fruit, and they say that the people are so hungry that they even collect and sell wild flowers. Looking at the current situation, the lady wondered if it would be interesting to hear news from the palace. When she was at the Duke's residence, she learned a lot of things that she didn't even want to know, but now they were completely cut off from society. It hadn't been long since Alex had sold out his location, and Louise feared it might be a vain hope. While her thoughts were occupied with serious problems, Eloy was interested in nothing but looking at the beautiful hats. She suggested going into the boutique to buy something. Now they could act like a ducal family. Alex happily agreed to go with them, and Louise tried to calm the enraged girl. She understood that at that age a lady needed to be in society, but now their family was in a difficult situation. And everything would have been calm that day if the hero had not managed to meet with the impudent men who had bullied the Duke in the past. While leisurely strolling through the city streets, they noticed that Alex was definitely standing near one of the shops. The Duke never appeared in this area on purpose so as not to run into ill-wishers. The men had already noticed that in front of them was definitely the very same Duke Alex, about whom the entire empire had recently been talking. Judging by his wife next to him, it was really him, and the impudent men had already noticed the beauty of the young lady, and Alex snatched up such a woman. The three of them immediately came up with a grand plan to approach Alex and ask how things had been going for him during all this time. And they certainly weren't going to pass by, and each of them was desperate to get into some kind of trouble. One of the young men said that all this time he had been wondering where the powerful Duke was, but it turns out he had been here all this time. Louise immediately recognized these young men. One of them was a count, the second a marquis, and the most important was a marquis named Marcel Howard, who never left the Duke alone. These three were well-known personalities, known to everyone in high society. Unlike Alex, who could be called a recluse, these people were sensitive to fashion trends and prone to gossip. The lady suggested not to pay attention. He understood that if they got involved, they would only fray all their nerves. Marcel turned to Louise and asked if she was not glad to see him, and he, unlike her, was interested to know how the Duke and his family were doing. With a cheeky grin, the young man declared that without Alex, their club had become completely boring. But in reality, these people were simply making fun of him. They were still meeting at their clubs, and Louise noticed that someone seemed to have too much free time. The heroine no longer wanted to see her husband suffer, realizing that she needed to do something right now. It turned out that Alex was no longer afraid of these people, and he looked proudly into the eyes of each of them. New characters were available to the hero, and it seemed that they would open up upon personal meeting. Now Alex was ready to see what each of them was capable of. Marcel Howard ran the largest factory in the empire, and it was he who maintained friendly relations with the emperor. Because the tyrant had made huge profits, he turned a blind eye to injustice, and this man had no fighting power. Marcel said confidently that without his wife the Duke was incapable of anything. He warned that if Louise was thinking of running away, he would be happy to help her get a job as a servant in his mansion. With every word they said, Louise became more and more nervous, and the young man did a great job of it. A young lady came to her aid, calling them crazy liars, and she did not want her family to be discussed at all. Young Aloy was like a small dog that could not be contained in high society. Although everyone looked down on Alex, his younger sister was his complete opposite, with a unique, vibrant sense of style and manner. The three had heard of each other, but they met in person for the first time only here. One of the young men said that he had some business with the young lady's brother, and that it wasn't she who had recently despised him more than anyone else. It was one thing for a young lady to bully her brother, but quite another for all sorts of other people to do it. It seems she was in a foul mood today, and it was a shame for the young men to get involved with someone like Lady Eloy. She was in even worse shape, but thanks to the outing she was able to clear her head, but now she had to deal with these fools. Adult men and high-ranking nobles were different from Louise. No one knew her before the commoners, and she could not compete with them either in terms of status or in terms of physical strength. Looking at this chaos, Louise could not stand aside when someone dared to say something about her family. The lower aristocrats had been bullying and tormenting the ducal family for years. Each time, Louise had to defend herself and her title among aristocrats who were simply lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family. One time, a lady tried to find out whether she and the Duke were really planning to have children, and she was allegedly incredibly interested in this topic. One day, one of the girls at a tea party confessed that the Duke was a little shy, and that was why he chose a bride from another empire. Another was sure that the newlyweds had problems and even offered to introduce them to an excellent specialist. Louise understood that they were saying this on purpose, and in fact there were no problems in their relationship. Then the heroine had to stand up for herself. She admitted that her husband was a little jealous, so getting help from strangers was not his style. The aristocrats were sure that this would anger the commoner who imagined herself a duchess. Louise knew that this particular lady was unfaithful to her husband and had a lover, and how did she have the right to say such a thing? The husbands of these girls were no different from them, and she even heard that some of them still couldn't have a child. Now Louise remembered that very conversation, and now there was no need to endure it for the sake of the family's honor, and she did not want to let everything slide again. The heroine decided to start with these idiots, after which she wanted to deal with all the rats. Louise asked with interest. Judging by the fact that the Marquis was still with his wife, he must have forgiven her for something. The heroine thought so. The young man knows nothing, and with all confidence she declared that his wife has a lover. The narrow social circle would be filled with all sorts of rumors, so Louise was sure it was better not to make enemies. Since she no longer cared, she was ready to tell such things. The Marquis began to get angry, not understanding what kind of nonsense the stupid girl was talking, and for his wife there was always only him. This was just his opinion, and as expected, the Marquis firmly believed his wife, but in fact he didn't know much. She suggested asking the Count about it, and for some reason his name kept coming up in the question. Louise suggested trying to find out about the Marquis's situation, since it seemed that he was the only one in the dark. The friend is also sure that his wife is simply projecting the situation onto others, and asked Marcel not to pay attention to her. The lady was sure that the Marquis would eventually find out everything himself, and it didn't matter that now she looked like a crazy girl. Louise screamed loudly that if the young men didn't want trouble, they shouldn't go after her husband's son-in-law, as they had already tormented them enough. The heroine no longer had the patience or desire to interfere in this. She asked these people to simply leave, but as soon as the Marquis heard about the betrayal, rage took over, and he could not control himself. He swung his hand with all his might, and the young lady Eloy was seriously frightened, and she understood how this could all end. Suddenly, Duke Alex struck the Marquis straight in the face with one blow. The blow was lightning fast and precise like a cobra's strike. The Marquis, who had been grinning smugly a second ago, collapsed to the ground as if he had been knocked down by an oak tree. In the ensuing silence, only his hoarse breathing could be heard, and a threat hung in the air, like a harbinger of a thunderstorm. All his life Alex endured and understood perfectly well that the Marquis was only a puppet in the hands of influential enemies who wanted his downfall. Even Louise, who had known her husband for so many years, did not believe that the master himself had just hit the man. Alex was perplexed by how such a worthless man dared to raise his hand against his wife, and the Marquis now looked like a piece of trash. Louise's command worked, and the hero was able to unlock a special skill, and finally, the system notification appeared again. It was clear to the hero that the skill was activated when Louise told him to leave her alone, and by the way, this skill turned out to be much more powerful than the one he had in his past life. The young men began to boast of their titles. A Marquis and a Count stood before the former Duke, and he dared to hit one of them. The last straw was the insult thrown at Louise, and Alex couldn't stand it. The Duke warned that the situation might become more dangerous, and that it would be better for the girls to stay behind. Alex had never gotten involved in anything like this before, and the young climber only suggested that his wife move a little further away. The young man turned to the Marquis, warning him that this time he would forgive him, but if they did not want to suffer seriously, they should get out of here as soon as possible. The Marquis certainly didn't expect the Duke to hit him, since he used to be a common stutterer. His friend asked him to stop pretending and get up, and was the Marquis really going to lie there after one blow? Suddenly the young man noticed that the one they had previously bullied was now speaking normally. No one could believe it, and these people had previously mocked the Duke, ridiculing his speech. Now Alex really spoke normally. He didn't stutter, although he had struggled with this affliction all his life. The heroes were afraid to imagine what was happening to the Empire with such stupid aristocrats, and they continued to say the same thing. The young men suggested that perhaps it was a coincidence, and he was only speaking like that now. They still couldn't get it, so Alex decided to use a different method, and from what he could see, these people had a bad habit of waving their arms. To ensure that none of them would ever think of doing anything like that again, the Duke stepped right on the Marquis's hand until he howled in pain. His friend didn't want to stand aside and was ready to attack at any moment, but something stopped him. He was stopped by Alex's powerful hand, which grabbed him by the collar so hard that he couldn't even move. Now the Duke looked like a majestic warrior, and the offenders immediately realized that they would not be able to do anything. And since these people did not understand in normal language, the gentleman decided to show how physical force works. It is unlikely that any of these aristocrats knew about the grueling training that Alex had undergone in his past life. They just kept calling him names and assured him that the Duke would not get away with it, and that they would definitely tell everyone about it. For one of them, this was a kind of entertainment, and the Count was ready to see what else the gentleman was capable of. Any of them could easily make Alex disappear without a trace, and the boy wondered if they were going to attack. Maybe he should try the skill. Everything was so different from the skills in his past life. Now Alex felt the warmth and comfort of family life, and he was ready to do anything to protect his family until the hand of one of the young men touched him with the words, "There is no point in making such a noise." At that moment, it seemed to him as if he had hit a concrete wall, and her chest felt as if it were made of stone. The skill's duration was short, the affection level and proficiency were low. Now that the skill was disabled, Alex felt empty. At that moment, Alex seemed to tower over them. His words sounded like a sentence. He had not just won, he had demonstrated his superiority. Alex dodged the Marquise's blows. He was weak. His sweeping movements betrayed more desperation than a real threat. All his aristocratic gloss crumbled in the absurd fight, revealing the ordinary malice of a petty schemer. Alex danced around him, gracefully dodging blows. He could have ended this in an instant, but he preferred to let the Marquis let off steam. The Marquis was huffing and puffing, his red face covered in sweat, but Alex only grinned, easily avoiding his clumsy attacks. The blow was unexpected and crushing. The young man, helpless and pitiful, who just a second ago was confident in his power, realized that everything was pointless. Alex stood over his fallen enemy, calm and unwavering, his eyes showing neither malice nor regret. None of them could believe that this was really the same weak duke who couldn't even answer them. It had been a long time since they had last met, so one of the friends chuckled, wondering if they hadn't just managed to say hello. He suggested making the jumper kneel, as they had done before, but it definitely had to happen now. The aristocrats decided to use dirty methods, and the girls noticed that there was a knife in one of the master's hands. Eloy didn't wait long. She grabbed the first stone that came to hand and threw it with all her might. Her throw was more accurate than ever, and now she felt like the heroine of all the novels. Just now, a huge stone flew straight into the face of the Marquis, an impudent deceiver who will regret everything. Eloy screamed angrily. It was all his own fault, and they were the first to take out their knives. Luckily, she managed to react quickly, and if it weren't for the young lady, the Duke would probably have already suffered. Because one of the aristocrats decided to use dirty methods. A sharp blade appeared behind his back, and he was sure that only a knife would help him solve the problem now. Louise screamed in horror. She saw that they had more than one knife, and the aristocrats were armed. It was not a fair fight, and Alex found himself completely alone against 3 people. It seems he didn't see anything. Louise realized this could end badly and rushed to help her husband. One of his friends was already running towards him, and a sharp blade flashed in his hands. Now Louise didn't care at all whether she could help in any way, but the main thing was that this blade didn't touch her husband. She screamed loudly. Alex immediately turned in her direction and realized that his wife was in danger. All this time she tried to restrain the impudent young man, and was ready to endure everything, even if it ended in injuries. Just at that moment, she managed to attract Alex's attention, who was able to take advantage of the distraction. The young man called this girl crazy. She deftly held him by the shoulders so that the knife would not hit anyone. It was the first time the Duke had seen his wife so brave, and she had just rushed at a man with a knife. Alex grabbed the knife-wielding attacker by the throat, his knuckles white with tension, the veins bulging in his neck. There was an icy rage in Alex's eyes, from which the offender, choking, trying to break free, dropped the knife. The blade bounced off with a dull thud, and the air smelled of steel. Louise couldn't take it anymore and screamed that if Alex didn't stop right now, he would kill him. Alex, looking contemptuously at the choking man, finally unclenched his fingers, and the offender collapsed, gasping for air like a fish thrown ashore. And he didn't want his wife to look upset, or even more so, to be so scared. This squabble needed to be ended, and the Marquis and his friends realized that they were powerless here. No one knew what had happened to the Duke, but the Marquis angrily declared that he had simply been lucky today. He called him crazy, and Alex chuckled, because were they really upset that they didn't see his stuttering Duke in front of them? Alex warned them once again that they should leave and never show up in their sight again. Louise, like a delicate flower blossoming in a greenhouse, had hardly ever encountered such cruelty. Alex was worried that Louise was scared he foresaw her possible anxiety, knowing how far from her nature scenes of violence and brutal displays of force were. Finally, she was safe, and the Duke became the man who could protect his family. Until now, the heroine had often encountered similar feelings, and many times felt changes in her husband. Today was the first time she saw Alex so different, so ruthless and pitiless. He hoped that Louise would see in his actions not only brute force, but also the defense of her honor, an expression of his boundless devotion. Alex felt saddened, seeing that these people almost got hurt because of him. The young man was angry. He had a good reason, and Louise admitted that he had nothing to apologize for, and people were to blame for everything. It was the first time she saw her husband in such a role. He looked incredibly cool, and she happily talked about it. Even his sister noticed the changes in her brother. He was throwing the marquises around like rag dolls, and it was incredibly funny. And since they found themselves in this wonderful place today, the heroes decided to go to another boutique to have a good time. The most delighted of all was young Eloy, who was ready to visit all the nearby shops and see what they already had. He realized that Louise saw in him not only a duke, but also a man ready to do anything to protect her, and his excitement gave way to a feeling of relief and gratitude. Alex was incredibly happy. In his past life he had managed to learn horse riding, and he had mastered these skills perfectly. Due to the Emperor's order, he couldn't even hire a cab, but thanks to his many skills, he had to perform a bunch of other tasks. After awakening in his previous life, the hero completed various physical training tasks. Through the system, even awakened people received simple tasks, while Alex had to master many sports. It seemed that the family was very surprised by this fact, but he understood that it would be wrong to admit it if he was asked about everything. Alex didn't intend to keep the lady's head spinning for long, and apparently the time had come to reveal the truth that few people had guessed. If Louise finds out that he is not her real husband, she might kick him out, and an inexperienced man like him will not be able to raise the level of affection. The young man was sure that his wife would be very upset upon learning of the death of the real Alex. He certainly couldn't tell her the whole truth right now, while their family life was just starting to improve. Sitting in a comfortable carriage, the lady looked thoughtfully out the window, and her thoughts were occupied with only one thing. Having decided to ask her husband's sister, she knew that she, like no one else, knew him better. Louise asked hesitantly if Alex had always been such a good fighter, but she also saw surprise in Eloy's eyes. Since the boys were always bullying him, the young duke had a hard time, but he certainly hadn't behaved like this before. Eloy said that her brother couldn't even run properly, let alone wield a sword, and the sound of gunfire scared him, so he never learned to shoot. She also found her brother's behavior strange. If he had fought from the very beginning, he would have put them in their place long ago. Louise suggested keeping today's events a secret from her mother for now, since she wouldn't like it if she found out that they had encountered these people. Both ladies agreed. It was quite a pleasant sight, and even the young lady never thought she would ever see those guys getting beaten up. There was nothing to hide. It was definitely pleasant on the one hand, but after all, the offenders should get what they deserve. That same evening, Louise asked if everything was okay with Alex, and whether he really didn't have any pain. Most of all, he was worried about his wife, who bravely rushed at the man with a knife and didn't even think about anything else. She decided to ask if Alex had always been such a good fighter, and even she hadn't known he was that strong. Alex had already made a mistake somewhere. He had been weak and stuttered before, and indeed such behavior would cause surprise. To be honest, the hero himself was completely confused by what had happened, admitting that it was a series of unimaginable events, and the biggest change was himself. It turns out that Alex was aware and understanding all this time how confusing everything seemed to his family. He admitted that he couldn't be sure exactly how it happened or why, but he could only say that he suddenly felt strong. At first, Louise thought he was pretending, but there was no reason for it, and if he had been so strong to begin with, he would have shown it long ago. Only his wife knew how much he had suffered all these years, and so it was obvious that strength had to come to him one day. There was only one thing on her mind. Alex's body had changed and so had his skills, and there definitely had to be a reason for it. Despite all her words, Alex felt that he was not yet ready to tell the whole truth, which is why he was hiding something. Perhaps this will be quite enough, and the young man only admitted that serious changes had indeed occurred within him. He himself didn't fully understand it, but there were some things that raised certain doubts, and they were definitely connected to his past life. Louise suggested that since Alex had received a special power, perhaps the method of obtaining it must also be special. This can't be called an ability that he acquired in exchange for a shorter lifespan. There are probably side effects. Alex didn't want to worry his wife, but it turned out the opposite, and she understood that his head was in the same confusion as hers. Despite this, she is ready to be with her husband. I understand that he is afraid, and perhaps he will not be able to get used to this. Of course, the real Alex was also handsome and in good health, but for some reason he had to act too abruptly. Louise assumed she had nothing to worry about, and if in the future he did find out the reason, he would tell her everything right away. The conversation was quite sincere and open, and Alex finally felt a little better. The lady decided not to bother him with questions anymore now she knew something, and that was enough to continue living happily. This was only from Louise's side, and the main character was never able to say that the real Alex was dead and that he was not her real husband. Perhaps if it was because she asked who she was and who her husband was, it would have been easier for him to tell the whole truth. There was no doubt in her gaze, and it was indeed difficult for her to see, since she and Alex were identical in appearance. The hero was only a shadow of his doubt, why exactly he entered Alex's body, and whether it was just a similarity, or perhaps he should avenge his death. Now the hero was interested in affection, what it was needed for, and it seemed that Louise loved this man with all her heart. The system again offered to rise to a higher level, as well as to gain affection points. That same evening, a luxurious carriage moved along the paths of a dark forest, and the enraged youths could not find peace. They rode in the carriage in silence, exchanging glances at each other, and traces of a fight were visible on their aristocratic jackets. For the first time in his life, the Marquis was humiliated in such a way, and in front of the Duke, whom he had previously laughed at, and it was simply ridiculous. The young man still couldn't believe that this was really the same Alex they had bullied all their lives. Not only could he not believe what had happened, but his friends also looked at each other in silence. One of them said that they could not sit idly by. If nothing was done, the Duke would start to mock everyone again. The same applied to his wife and sister, and these ladies openly laughed at the titular aristocrats. It was all so absurd that the Marquis couldn't believe he really couldn't hit him even once. Even more, he could not believe the ladies' words about his wife having a secret lover. This definitely couldn't have happened. The Marquis and his wife Julia were together a long time ago. They couldn't be called a model couple, but for some reason everyone was left with a bad taste in their mouth, and one of the young men declared that they should report everything to the Emperor. Perhaps it is worth telling them that they were beaten and humiliated by the Duke, and then we will see how the Emperor will act. Of course, what happened to Alex was so shameful that they would have liked to hide it, but the power of this man was no joke. Even if you tell it, no one will believe it. Everyone will consider it a joke and laugh at the Marquis and his friends. Now all that remained was to tell it in such a way that the Emperor would understand that the Duke had done the deeds and that he was to blame. The Marquis said they had a way. They couldn't get their hands dirty because they were aristocrats and owned a huge business. Alex may have attacked the wrong people today, but he was defending the honor of his family, and a tired Louise was trying to sleep. Alex no longer stuttered and used his body much better, and for the first time in her life she felt safe. Her husband had changed a lot, the timid posture had disappeared, the relationship had become somehow cold, and the habit of covering his entire body had disappeared somewhere. Now Louise thought that Alex no longer cared how exposed his upper body was, and the only thing that remained the same was his appearance. The main thing is that he hasn't changed for the worse, and Alex himself always wanted to be strong. For some reason, Louise felt a certain uneasiness that evening, which disappeared without a trace the next morning, and a grand picnic awaited the heroes. Today was a day off. The family decided to spend time at a cozy picnic, and the cook prepared all the sandwiches in advance. Eloy ate the tasty treat with gusto and couldn't even believe that just recently she had been eating only boiled potatoes. Louise poured orange juice, and she was incredibly happy when she saw how happy all the family members were. Alex did not remain without her attention, and the heroine tried to please everyone so that this family holiday would be simply wonderful. The food was truly incredible, prepared by the chef, and Alex felt proud of everything he had managed to do for them. Unexpectedly, the lady noticed that her husband had not liked beef sandwiches before, but now he ate them with pleasure. The preferences were as follows: the mother-in-law liked fried salmon as a filling, the young lady liked a lot of ham, and Alex usually ate chicken sandwiches. Today she decided to prepare, and noticed that her husband, who had refused treats, now ate with appetite everything that was offered to him, and this said one thing: his taste had really changed a lot, as had he himself.